cue. All right, three, two, one.
Hey everybody, I'm Jason Nauer from LTV, and I'm here to bring you some election night coverage. So the way that we are going to go about it tonight is a little bit different than we've gone about it in the past. A few of the people that we used to have here hosting the show, their schedules didn't really line up, and so what we wanted to do is we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about East Hampton and our elections from a historical standpoint. Um, it was supposed to go on at 8 o'clock, but I wanted it to start a little bit earlier just because I wanted to give you a bit of a rundown about how things can go on this one. Um, Last year, we had some problems where people were having a hard time reading the results off of the screen. So, our goal this year is to kind of bring them to you in a bit of an easier fashion. So, over here, here, there's a QR code. So, Zach, why don't you go to the title that says Scan QR Code? So if you were to go take your phone and go to that QR code and scan it, what you will see is the election results. You'll basically be taken to the Suffolk County Board of Elections. Now, this site has given us some hard times navigating it on mobile and a little bit on desktop. So I wanted to give us a chance to walk through it a little bit. Zach, could you enable the screen share on overlay? Perfect, buddy. Thank you very much. So this is my screen right now, and I'm going to be scrolling through here. But if I were to go back to our initial one, we wind up getting, and it's choosing right now to actually be very helpful. It might take you, the first one, it might open up as a town of Babylon. They're just going in alphabetical order. But the second you're there, don't be too freaked out. Just go down to East Hampton or Southampton if this is broadcasting in Southampton. Now you might be saying to yourself, why is it that I only see the supervisor vote for one? Look at the bottom left-hand side over here for superintendent. Well, tight race. We also have town justices, council members, assessor, and trustees. Now, Zach, you can take off the overlay right now. None of the results have come in yet because the polling is still open and people can still go to the polling areas to vote. But we wanted to start a little bit early just to kind of go through this. If you do have if you do need the link and it's not working on your phone, tonight, if you want to, please email me. Zach, throw that up there. You can email me, jason@ltveh.org, for some technical assistance, and we can go and I'll send you over the link. And if there's a problem, just let me know. We want to focus on our public service tonight. And speaking of that, we go back to the public service of understanding our history and where we're coming from. And I had the opportunity to interview three individuals who have a great deal to say. One was Gnu Benton, who was a part of our indigenous community out here and played a great role in their culture and in a lot of their ceremonies. And I got to talk to him about what life was like before settlement, before colonization, to understand that even before there was a settlement here, the people that were here had their values and how they elected their representatives and how they really went for people in their form of governance. The second person that I got to talk to, I was very grateful for, was Richard Whelan. Fantastic, well-spoken person, very passionate member of our community. You've probably seen him if you watch our planning boards or zoning boards or even the town board. He's a very active participant in our community. And I got to talk to him about certain key points in the election history and how they have shaped our town. And the last, and certainly not least, is Hugh King, who I got the pleasure to sit down with right here. And we got to really just talk a bit about the shaping of our community and a little bit of everything. But I'd like to start off tonight with our friend Gnu Benton. So Zach, if you can cut to that, I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hey, everybody. I am here with my good friend Gnu, who is a filmmaker. He is a member of the Native community out here. I would say he's a cornerstone, and he's always provided great insights to us. Gnu, it's fantastic to have you here with us.
And good seeing you again.
It's good seeing
So
you.
firstly, I'd like to introduce myself in our Ojibwe language. Bojo Nindawe Magnidug. Hello, all of my relatives. Muckade Gnu Indigenous Cause. My name is Black Golden Eagle. Awazasi and Odem. I am from the Bullhead Catfish Clan. And Ojibwe Madewin and Dao. I'm an Ojibwe Madewin man. And we also say Wijaganashi Bajina Bungi. I'm gonna start speaking English now. That's basically how our proper introductions would go when speaking with the people, since this is an appropriate topic about how it is traditional societies operated. So that's anytime we would speak, we would say all of those things to represent ourselves, our people, our community, our family, when addressing the people.
So we go back to that idea of the people. And we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but I wanted to perhaps because today's our focus is elections, our democratic process, the election cycle, but I wanted to make sure that we were also talking about. I think it's impossible to talk about our American democracy without talking about the people that were here before. This place was called America, and who have, I would say that their spirit of people having their say is imbued into the land as much as anything, as much as the sky and as much as the water. I'd say that spirit is it, in a way, you could argue that is what has caused democracy in this land. And I think that's almost a fair statement, because you look at the world that was beforehand, the cultures that came here beforehand, that there was the imperialism that happened beforehand, and how much of that, not all of it, but how much of it was repealed in a way by the land itself. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about this, because you enlightened me years ago about the first lines of our Constitution, and about certain links and a link that it has to the Native community.
Yes. So first and foremost, when you start thinking about Native American societies and how it is that we operated, first and foremost, we belonged to the land. We didn't have ownership over land. Of course, we had territories, but we never waged war unless it was absolutely necessary. And we weren't a patriarchal society in the sense of decision making. We had a council of grandmothers, council of mothers, and we say that the women were the ones who were ultimately the ones that were in charge of letting us know whether or not we could take a life. So we always tried to do healthy alternatives before that. A lot of our games, like lacrosse and stickball and fireball and things that are appropriate on the East Coast, these were made so that there wouldn't be no bloodshed in case of an argument or a disagreement. And because we believed that all life has autonomy, and you can see that through our languages. And that's one thing that kind of has been lost within our communities in short, because when we're infiltrated by the English language, it's very male dominated patriarchal. It's when the colonists got here, they didn't want to hear any of our women when we're the ones that said they're the decision makers, and they only wanted to speak to men. So they forced us to get into these governmental roles where we only had men in charge, and that kind of permeated into our cultures to be able to function that way because the imperial force, the colonial force, didn't allow our functionalities and totally disrupted all of that. So when we talk about the autonomy of nature and what our language has to say to how it is that we govern things, you can see the things that were animate and inanimate, the things that we considered having life, and why it is that life was so abundant when the colonists got here. Because we know that if we took too much, then we wouldn't survive. We knew that the earth was special and precious and our mother, and that we'd always have to give back. It's not a one-sided thing. We're not governed by our religion saying that we have ownership and dominion over everything, but we have a kinship with everything. And so yes, when the colonists got here, and my people, the Ojibwe, even though I grew up on Long Island, I'm Ojibwe, and our people came from the East Coast about 1,000 years ago. But we did have a prophecy of the light-skinned people coming. So our spiritual people, the Ojibwe, we picked up our scrolls and our writings and our spiritual things, and we moved all the way west to the Great Lakes to buy us some time, basically. And those who were left were those who were left and suffered the consequences of that prophecy over time. And so the societies that were left behind that still practiced longhouse traditions were the Haudenosaunee, or the Six Nations people, who adopted Algonquin longhouse and water drum ways of doing things, even carrying wampum. They've been known over time as wampum people, but they got their wampum through trade through the people on the East Coast from Long Island, especially because that's where the richest purple shells come from. And you can't make wampum belts without the purple and white. And they be the keeper of wampum belts. That was their style of doing things. And those became very important historical documents. If you can think of hieroglyphs and how those are made as a form of writing, so too are our wampum belts. They have symbolisms on them, and it is writing. Oftentimes people say that Native American people didn't have writing. I know growing up in Southampton, I was told that we didn't have any writing system, but I said, I saw it. I saw a writing. It may not be, ABC 1, 2, 3, but it's definitely writing. And we have our people who are able to read that, and it was considered very ceremonial because almost everything that we have as Native people is considered sacred. The voice, being able to interpret things, to be cautious about the things that you say, to have intention with the words that you say, with the songs that you sing, because you're going to be passing these behaviors down the rest of your lines through generation after generation. And so when the settlers encountered the Six Nations people, and that the fact that they still had their wampum belts, and the first line when their medicine people read those wampum belts, some of those lines were very profound to the colonists, saying, "We the people, that all men are created equal." You know what I mean? These are very profound ideas because the colonists came from a very colonial and imperial society, very hierarchical. We had hierarchies and class systems, but it was based off of respect and the roles of people within our societies and our communities. So with and of course when the colonists encountered these ideas, and of course that created a whole new set of thought process to the visitors that came to this land, and
Yeah.
which eventually, in my opinion, it may be historically accurate, but led to the the independence from their their suppressors. You know what I mean? So the ideas may have started, you know, very genuine to create a free and democratic society. You know what I mean? Where the people have the decision making because that's what they encountered. You know, it wasn't about, you know, kings and queens and, you know, monarchies and whatever. And, you know, it was about true democracy where the people made the choices, and it would not, um, no choice would be made unless everybody agreed, or at least the majority. You know what I mean? Um, so even today, when we have our ceremonial lodges, our ceremonies, we we um, we elect our chiefs and our grandmother chiefs and everybody in position through the decision making of who it is that is best fit. You know, it's not narrowed down to, you know, just a couple people, like, for example, this presidency, or, you know, there's anybody can step up and prove themselves to be a good leader with their knowledge, with their experience, with their ability to be able to put themselves aside, to be able to care for the people, to make decisions. And that's the real governance that we came from. Even today, the community that I lived with for so long, the Shinnecock people, their trustee system was based off of majority vote, three men. You know, for the longest time, it was that way. And it wasn't until my generation grew up where they took a more traditional stance to the governance, where they changed the bylaws to be able to have um, women and men. You know, women, like I said, were not allowed to be chiefs on Shinnecock until just recently, you know, not that many years ago. And this was basically because Southampton Town didn't want to hear our women and the opinion of our women. Um, so we changed that. And also with the elder system, we don't have a council of elders, but we do have an electoral process where we do select one elder and one female elder, one male elder, one female elder. And they become these guiding positions to our younger people, well, you know, younger than them on the council, you know. So you have, you know, basically seven people, I think it is right now, I'm not sure, where you have two elders and then the five council people. And they're also incorporating men and women, both old and young, you know. And it is a true electoral process where every single member of the community casts a vote.
Yep.
And everybody is well known within the community. You know, nobody's going to vote for somebody they don't know. And, you know, it is kind of easier in those smaller situations. You know, we don't have millions of people and, um, you know, basing our judgment off of these two people or three people that we don't know to become president. We don't do that. You know what I mean?
I always find that part of the process to be the thing that I like, and I one of the reasons why I'm pushing for I'm happy about this broadcast, is that I like local. That's kind of my philosophy. Like local. I think that when you have local
Mhm,
accountability, with you only get good decisions with good accountability, and that only happens on a local level when you have to live with the ramifications of your decisions.
mhm,
And I guess I mean that does kind of go back to almost a seven generations mindset of that, which is that you've got to actually, what's going to be like, where's it going to be down the line? Seven generations. I don't. We can't think like that in our in this current culture. So the best we can do
mhm,
is, well, can you at least think about where you live? Can you
mhm.
can you at least think about the water quality of what you're drinking? Can you at least
Yeah.
think about every bad decision, and this is completely autonomous of any political ideology. because we've seen this in imperial societies, you've seen this in capitalist societies, you've seen this in communist societies. Anytime you get the accountability away from the ramifications of the actions, bad decisions happen every single time. It is
Every
the
single time.
easiest thing to measure. Every single time, you will always see whomever is in charge. You'll see some oil baron who has no problem polluting the world live in an area that's pristine, beautiful, untouched by man, and they'll tout this as a beautiful thing, a profound thing. They'll have beautiful gardens and everything else, but what they do is create ruin. And again, it's that idea of they've removed themselves from the accountability of their actions. What's cool about what the system of governance that you're describing, and you're talking about has smaller local community. You know, every vote on the local level truly counts. It bears weight. You know, think of that as like, you know, dilution. You know, you have a very, very undiluted amount of power locally, you know, when it comes to this. And the farther away you go from that, the less power and agency you have in the decisions. So that's why, again, like going back to the idea of, well, every person in the tribe, their views, their opinions mattered. Why? Because you have to live with them every day. And you'll live with their children and their children's children. And you'll live in this land for the rest of your life. That was the mindset. And it was a mindset, you can argue that that's a mindset of extreme ownership in a way. You're owning the fact that you are there to take care of the land. You're part of the land. You know, and it's not an ownership in the way of like owning something, but I'm talking about owning the ramifications of the actions.
So there was a discussion that I had in middle school with a teacher, and you know, he tried to counter me with a discussion about the land, and he was like, "Well, I thought Native Americans didn't view that they owned anything and owned the land and things like that." I said, "No, but when we talk about my land, this is my land. You know, it's like saying my sister or my father or my child. Yeah, you don't own it, but there is a big sense of responsibility that you have towards those things to make sure that whatever upbringing that you give it is stable and secure. You know what I mean?"
Yep.
So that's the sense of belonging. That's the sense of ownership, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's the familial tie. You know, and that there is no difference between, you know, your family and the land you see around you. And it makes a great deal of sense in that regard, because of the fact that if you lose that land, the bounty of those resources, what happens is that you wind up losing your family. All of this is one. It's a easy symbiotic relationship to understand. If you were to look at it from an ecosystem, I think that a lot of times our ego stops us. And when I say our ego, I mean the ego from the West. I think it stops us from viewing things in the sense of a complete system. You know, if you were to look at something in the bottom of the seafloor, we have no problem with David Attenborough going down there and saying, "Look at this and this huge ecosystem where everything is interconnected and interdependent." And then we look at each other and we're like, "Well, that's clearly not us. I have no idea I have no idea what he's talking about on this." So when we're talking about the importance of elections, and you know, it's hard. It's a hard one for us to get around, is the fact that we pushed forward a narrative of democracy while simultaneously denying people of their rights. And that has to be viewed as a part of the full American history. That there are things that we've done which are very interesting and very changing in this realm. There have been ramifications to and it has not been distributed equally. You know, so if you want, because again, this is, you know, on top top of it being election day, it is also Native American Heritage Month. So if you want to talk anything along those lines, I'd love people to hear it.
I think one of the things I do want to talk about is the kind of people that we did elect. Not only were they knowledgeable, educated, um, but the number one word would be humble. And I knew in ceremony times who were chiefs because oftentimes they would be sitting on the floor. They'd be giving up their seats to the people. Um, today it's become very cliche, but it's a very real thing where we say we know our leaders by how little that they have because they've given it all away, and anything, any gifts or whatever they would acquire. And this kind of goes on your comment about that oil tycoon that's destroying the world, but keeping and hoarding wealth to make sure that he's okay and only his family. Um, we wouldn't elect a person like that to be able to make decisions. We didn't judge a person, a male or a female, on how many possessions that they had and how much they accumulated, because we would say that they were selfish and didn't have anybody else's interests in mind in decision making. Um, Usually, the most poorest people were our leaders, and I say that because today decisions are made based off of money. And as Native American people, we were governed by morality, true morality. Um, what effect will this have 7 generations from now? Like you said, that's a very big idea that we had. Um, if it's not going to be good for our children 7 generations from now, then we shouldn't do it. If they're not going to have clean water or good food to eat or a place to live, then we shouldn't do it. And I think that's kind of what it is that it's very contradictory because even today as a filmmaker, there's this ego-driven image that you have to portray in social media and all of these things. I got to put on a suit and put on my beadwork and talk a good game in order to be accepted in modern day society, with an image of who it is that I need to portray. You know what I mean? But really, if I could just be this humble person and make movies and people see me for who I am, then I would really absolutely love that. But a lot of times it's not really how it works. The more that I am getting known, it is easier to do that. And but there's networking you have to do. It's a whole game, and that's kind of the hard thing, that word game, that you have to play, as opposed to just doing the right thing and being amongst good people, doing the right thing and making good choices, and making your society based off of that. Because we didn't have money. We believed in trade before, and a lot of times people take that, what we had, the wampum, and said it was America's first currency because how spiritual and sacred it was. Because, like I said, everything was sacred to us. Everything was symbolic and had a meaning. We looked at our time that we had, and we knew that it was a valuable resource, and we didn't want to waste that time with too much nonsense. You know what I mean? Things that clouded the mind. Um, things that were considered pretty too inappropriate, or interfering with creating a good moral environment for people and their upbringing. So we traded things, and the reason why wampum was considered sacred, was considered money, was the way that the colonists saw how sacred it was to us. And we had no problem giving those things. And oftentimes we would receive things in trade because that's kind of how things happened. That's how we lost Manhattan. these are some sacred things here. Have these things. These things will help you. These things will help you along your journey. And then somebody said, "Oh, you're giving this whole island." You know what I mean? So we don't try to think of things that way. Um, there was a time when our communities would all have our doors unlocked, and we talk about those times because we remember our elders talking about those times where that's how safe our communities would be. Um, I don't see kids riding their bikes on the street anymore like we did when we were younger, and being raised by the community because it's been so um, the mentality of people has degraded so much, or at least it's been exposed so much through social media where it's been making people afraid. And I think about what my point of all that is, leaving the doors unlocked and leaving food on the table in case there were, especially with our own people, we would have oftentimes a lot of poverty and poor people. I think my grandmother on Shinnecock, she didn't have running water until we kind of made her do it. You know what I mean? Because she didn't want it. She wanted to live humbly. And some people didn't have plumbing until recently. And this isn't about how poor we are, but it's about the system not being able to be sufficient for every person that's involved in the community. You know what I mean? So like because we live in that colonial way, we're forced to vote for people who still wouldn't put running water and pipes through our land, who wouldn't allow the post office to even come up because we're not considered United States territory. We couldn't get mail. We got to go in Southampton to get our mail. We have to vote for people that won't even let us on our own ocean. You know what I mean? So in the Indian way, we wouldn't be voting for those people. We would probably elect one of our own and put them in that process because that's not what we that's not how we govern our society. We don't govern our society by how big those houses are on Dune Road. We govern our society about how we elect those people that are going to protect those whales from being blown up, you know, by those wind turbines on the ocean to maintain their longevity because they're sacred, beautiful beings. You know, now I don't want to get too emotional or get too off
Sure.
topic here, but that's if you think about how it is that we do things, we made sure, like I said, we had that tea, we had the coffee, we had the food right on the kitchen table in case somebody was poor and was hungry. They were able to come into our house and they didn't look at anything else and want to take it, you know, because they were so grateful that we looked out for them to give them things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
So,
and that goes back to this the structure of of your community and the values of your community will dictate its future regardless, almost regardless of the resources that are around it, more important than the resources that are around it. I mean,
mhm.
if you look at the survival of, I mean, literally the survival of the Native American cultures out here on the East Coast in particular, and I can focus on that is because it was a first contact, because so many of them are first contact. So many
Mhm.
of you have the Abenaki, you have all so many people, so many people,
I mean, you can think
and
of
it
the 13 tribes that were documented. And back then, the tribes all had one name, but where the colonists found them is where what the name that they got. So they found 13 communities on Long Island, and three remain. Think about that. Think
yeah,
about that devastation in our societal structure, our familial structure. And I think that the communities that remained, like the Shinnecock, like the Unkachug, like the Montaukett, they they're so protective, and that's how it is that they were able to maintain their longevity these past 500 years of contact. You know what I mean?
fair. And I think about all that we've lost in the sense of like the wisdom that we've lost. Like it's funny when you look at our idea of conservation, our idea of environmentalism, or anything that we're trying to pass these days when it comes to our elected officials, every single person talks about water quality. Every single one of our
Hmm.
elected people running right now are talking about water quality. That was a
Yeah.
talking point 500 years ago too. It just wasn't
Hmm.
listened to.
Well, money was on top of all that, though. That's what governs everything.
Yeah.
People will sacrifice, you know, the water quality if it, fills somebody else's pockets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't until like last summer that I was on Sugarloaf Hill, the land that was actually reacquired to be put back. I filmed Mirror Man there, where there was a big mansion, and it was uh, bought back by I forget the organizations right now, but on behalf of the Shinnecock Nation. So when I was up there on top of that hill where that house stood, I can see the brown patches in Shinnecock Bay, and it's literally fecal matter in the water based off of
Yeah.
all the runoff, and our children are playing in that, and you know there has to be something wrong with a society that governs itself to be able to do that to its people. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
so if you look at even the Shinnecock community, there was massive efforts over the past few years to put land reclamation of the beach, the peninsula that is Shinnecock, replanting grass, the seagrass, uh, putting oysters back, even though that was an economic venture. It was an economic venture based off of what we knew what would happen to our water. And our cleanest water is right around the Shinnecock Peninsula because of the amount of shellfish that we put back into the water, the amount of grasses that we put back into the water. You know what I mean? And speaking of wampum, it said that one of the biggest indicators that we're not being responsible to our people and our land is the purple color of the quahog shell, because it's directly tied to our spirituality. And we say that the purple represents the blood of the people and the goodness and the honesty that we put into the land, and um, our longevity. So I've noticed, because I was a wampum maker over time, over the past like decade or so, um, and I've noticed a decline in the amount of purple shells that we were able to get, and that was very concerning because a lot of times people look at our traditional beliefs and just kind of like, turn a cold shoulder at what we believe and what we teach. But these things are rooted in actual fact and science. So when we say that when the purple of that shell diminishes, that we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. So, scientifically speaking, if the soil quality and the water quality isn't good, you'll see a decline in that. And that's one of those, just like frogs, just like any amphibians and things like that, you'll see a decline in the natural order of things. And we are not doing what we're supposed to be doing as human beings to protect that.
Yeah.
It's
If
way
you
off
think
topic. I don't know if that
no,
answered your
no,
question.
well, no, I mean, like, I don't know, in a way it kind of spawns something different here, which is important, which is kind of like the idea of nature having a vote.
Yeah, autonomy.
We talk about, yeah, we always talk about everything, we want people to have a vote, this so forth and so on. I wonder, and it's just
Hmm.
kind of like, and because of how our language is structured, because of how the original culture was structured, language never,
Hmm.
sorry, nature never got a vote. When you're talking about nature being a part of your family, you're a part of its family, it's a part of your family. It always has a vote. It always is there. You're not going to hurt
Hmm.
it because it is a member of your community as much as anyone else is. You don't have that separation between the two. So the way I think about it is that, an easy way to grasp it is that, you know, uh, nature was denied its agency by being denied its rights.
Hmm.
And it's a and if you're against that idea of nature having rights, then how long are you going to live? Are you going to live 7 generations? It's a
Hmm.
hard It's like right now, it's like, people are freaking out, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. It's like we have to elect the right people. Not only, again, I believe you have to elect people who are in your community, who are accountable for that. People who you can trust, people who you can talk to. And I'm not saying agree with, but I mean talk to, communicate with. There's going to be times where I don't agree with people. That's okay. That's part of the democratic
Hmm.
process. And I hope that from our disagreements, that there's a synthesis that can happen along those lines. Maybe I can learn something. Maybe they can learn something. I don't know. It's a goal. It's a hope. It's a weird act of faith that we have. The
Hmm.
faith by communicating in and of itself, you have a weird faith in your fellow person. It's an undescribable kind of thing. Um, it's been
Well, faith
fantastic.
in your fellow human being shouldn't be weird.
Yeah.
We should be able to have faith in our fellow human being to do the
It
right thing.
shouldn't it shouldn't be weird. It should not be weird, but you know what? It's a leap. It's a leap, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? To look at somebody else that you don't know and say, "All right, well, I'm going to trust that you're voting for someone and that I'm voting for someone, but that we've kind of as a group figured all of this out." If you were to take it down to just a simple act of personal ownership, personal property, the ideas of the self against all other around it, it doesn't make sense. The idea doesn't make sense. If you take it from the standpoint of the oil baron who would destroy the world around them, only so that they could live they could live in this beautiful bastion of peace, then yeah, the philosophy doesn't make sense. But again, I think, you have to have some sense of moving forward. You have to have something that you can agree with, and so you can still survive for those 7 generations.
Yes. And I think that I'll close whatever it is that I have to say, especially with this interview. Um, what is that old saying? Um, when the last waters have been poisoned and run dry, and there's no more food to eat, you'll realize that you can't eat money. So the prioritizing of what it is that we have to think about and who it is that we have to vote for, is important. Again, if we can think, if our fellow brothers, the colonialists, the colonists, can look to us finally, and in some decision making, you know, we can be at a really beautiful place that can survive for us. And just want to say thank you, Jason, for having me today. Pleasure seeing you again and talking to you. And
10 seconds.
conversations are always good.
I miss our coffee together. All right, I'll see you soon, though.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Rock on. Talk to you
All right,
later.
brother. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, everybody. And Zach, you can take off the ticker on, I think, overlaid, was it 2? Hey, it's on. All right, everybody. So thank you very much for listening to the interview. Thank you, Gnu, for participating in the conversation, for adding your information. It's important to remember that there is always going to be things that we simply do not know about our history because of how many people were left out of it. And so it's important for us to carry that moving forward into our decisions and bear that weight. So again, Gnu, thank you for being there with us. So I'd like to talk a bit about, again, do a quick recap on how we're doing tonight. And so tonight, if you are just tuning in and you want to see election results, sadly, none of them are reported in yet, but I'll tell you where to go. So you take your phone, take your camera, turn the camera on, and then you point your phone at the screen, and then you'd find the QR code. There we go. And can't see it on this, but Zach, you can do the overlay for me. All right. So that should lead you to there, the Suffolk County Board of Elections. Now, if you're doing it on your phone, the phone has been a little tricky because it wasn't really built for mobile. And so you have to kind of mess with it a little bit. One of the things that I have found, nope, it didn't help. I thought turning it sideways could help and make it work a little bit better. So you have to hit your town that you want to go for. Now for mine, every single time I log into this, it always has me automatically go to the town of Babylon. I hit the back button. That's a little blue button on the very top over here. Hit back. And at that point, it gives me the options to go choose East Hampton, Southampton, and Riverhead. So I'm just going to go to East Hampton. All right, it doesn't look like any of the polls are reporting in yet. Let's see. No. Again, the only thing that we're sending you to is the live feed from the Suffolk Board of Elections itself. And that way you will always have the power to go and check it and to see what's happening. Now, Zach, you could throw my email up on this? Is that right? When Zach throws my email up, there it is. What you'll see is you'll be able to reach me, and if you have any problems getting the website or anything along those lines, send me an email. I'll send you the link that I have, and I think that you can always have access to it. All right, so the next interview that we are going to show tonight is an interview from Wick Whalen, and he is a local attorney. He's very active in our trails preservation, and you often see him at a lot of our municipal meetings. So I'm going to go throw it over to him, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Nauer here, and I am here with Richard Whalen, and it's a pleasure to have him here. He is a local attorney. He does a lot of work with the Trails Preservation Society of East Hampton. He's an Amagansett, and he is a wealth of information. If you've ever watched our planning board videos or ZBA, we often see Rick there, and he has a great wealth of knowledge of our community and our town, and it's always interesting to hear his opinion. Rick, thank you for being here with us.
You're welcome, Jason. Thank you.
All right, great. So we wanted to talk today about the importance of local elections, and what was the point that you wanted to focus on was how they became elected and their history?
Yeah, so a little one thing I think, just to give people some perspective of how how elections or the selection, I guess, of your officials, public officials, has been handled in East Hampton over the years. So the town, as everyone knows, was founded in 1648, East Hampton Town, from a very, very, I think the first town, if you will, election, it wasn't called that at the time, but the first selection of officials dates to 1650 or 1651. And in those early years, in the first decade and a half to 2 decades of East Hampton's existence, it was virtually its own country. It wasn't yet connected to New York Colony. In fact, the western part of Long Island and the New York area was at that time still controlled by the Dutch. And East Hampton's connections were closer to Connecticut, where there was a Connecticut colony and a New Haven colony, but we weren't really part of that. So the early officials were called the 3 men or the 5 men, and they were simply chosen by an assembly of obviously all male voters at the time, but people who held property in the town, and they came together and they voted. Things became more formal after 1686 because by 1666, when Governor Nichols, New York Colony governor, English Governor Nichols, issued the town a patent, the town was then kind of forcibly connected to New York Colony, even though our East Hampton's residents at the time preferred the Connecticut New England connection. So from 1666, East Hampton was part of New York. In 1686, Governor Thomas Dongan issued the Dongan Patent, which we all pretty much know created the town trustees. So the trustees were the first formal body politic in the town. And their composition was dictated by the Dongan Patent, which also stated when they would be elected. And that would be at a town meeting held on the first Tuesday of every April of every year. And for the next 250 years, a little over 250, well, a little under because it was 1686, but for the next 2+ centuries, that is what happened. East Hampton elected its officials, primarily the trustees, but I'll get into a little bit more than that in a moment, from at the first at an annual. Everyone comes to a town meeting on the first Tuesday in April. So the town did have
And what's it set up where it would go from like half of them elected and then half of them were staying on board? Or was it still a
oh,
2-year
so
term?
there were 12 trustees in the Dongan patent when the Dongan patent established the trustees as a 12-person body. In the mid 1960s, I think in 1965, there was state legislation that went through that reduced the number of trustees to the number we have today, which is 9. But in every year on town meeting day, not election day, town meeting day, whoever, whatever elected positions there were chosen. So they could replace the electorate could replace the entire board of trustees. You had the trustees, 12 of them, again until 1965. You had a town supervisor, first elected in 1693. That position is not mentioned in the Dongan Patent. In fact, it's not even terribly clear what the town supervisor did for most of the next 2 centuries, but there was a town supervisor. And then they were elected justices of the peace and elected constables. That's how things ran until 1905. And
Wow.
in 1905, there was a proposal. The world was changing by that point, obviously. People were getting a little bit too busy, and there were too many people to necessarily all assemble at a single, Tuesday in April. So there was a proposal put forth in January, in a special meeting in January 1905, which was shot down initially, to have district voting. There would be 4 election districts in the town. People would vote in Springs, East Hampton, Amagansett, and Sag Harbor. That was rejected in January, but the town meeting hadn't occurred yet. So in April of 1905, there was a vote by I think it was around 400 to about 300 to actually go from the traditional town meeting method to actual district, voting, which is what we have today, except on a larger scale. And that really is what created election day in East Hampton. Now you had polling done at 4 different places, and then all the votes would have to be assembled, put together, and determine who won. So that was a big change. And around the same time, the town also began to have a town board, which in the early days consisted of the supervisor, the town clerk, and 4 justices of the peace. And there was actually a 6. So the trustees around that time, they began to take kind of a secondary or subsidiary role, more like what they do today, where the trustees really today, they don't have governing power today. They manage the lands they still own, which are mostly underwater lands, not exclusively, but mostly underwater lands. And the real governance of the town is now, from the early 1900s, was delegated to the town board. And that's how things were. The town actually had 6 town board members until 1934, I believe. And then the town clerk just became the town clerk and no longer was a voting member of the town board. But there were still justices of the peace. And that began to change in 1955. I think the New York State law changed, and justices of the peace were beginning to would be moved into their role as they are today as town justices. And so you began to elect council people, councilmen or councilwomen, along with the supervisor. And so from 1955, I think the transition took a few years. So I think by the mid 1960s, we had the current setup where you have a supervisor, 4 town board members besides the supervisor, and the supervisor runs for election every 2 years, and the 4 councilmen are on staggered 4-year terms. So each year you're voting for 3 members of the town board.
Right.
Or every 2 years. And town elections are held in an odd year.
Right. So that is kind of fascinating that, we had this point where I never thought of it that we had our justices were effectively also our council, also effectively our council members at the same time. So that it's funny because with the increase of modernization, we also see the increase of specialization. People need to, all of these roles get far more complex. You're an attorney. The amount of precedent that you have to deal with grows in complexity exponentially every year. It always baffles me, like where you just see rows and rows and rows of precedent upon precedent upon precedent. So it totally makes sense that early on in our country that we don't really factor that in because it's not that much of a need to be that hyper specialized. But then later on, you really do need a justice and you really do need a council person. They are two different points.
Yeah, really. I mean, early on, there was obviously people were much more generalists. Think of attorneys. I mean, an attorney in the 19th century, would probably be able, you would expect that person to handle almost anything relating to the law. Today, as you know, attorneys are far more specialized. Very few people even attempt to be generalists, and even if they do, they can only still be generalists within a certain sphere. You can't do everything. You just can't. You can't know. You can't be good at it. So.
No, it requires that specialization, and also on top of that, we also grew in our complexity of our town, where not only did we go to at a point where we're just simply an agrarian society, where it's just like with seafaring and agrarian, we also had points of industrialization that happened. I think it's interesting because like 1905, what I start to think about is our shift. So we've had a few shifts in our in the history out here. One was the initial point of colonization, of course, which everyone can think about. We had which almost automatically created a shore whaling, where kids would be on top of the houses looking out at the sea to see if they could see whales, and then the men would go out and they would bring the whales back. Very similar to how the indigenous people of the time did it as well. But then we also get to the point where whale oil itself becomes a massive industry, and it becomes a huge point of wealth. And I believe that's why Fishhook Mulford, I think, went to petition the king, correct?
Yes, he went to England. To try to fight off the whale oil tax that I forget which government was fighting with. It was after Dongan, but
yeah. So we have these points where it goes from simple agrarian. Whale oil becomes a big thing for the entire world, because that way everyone can stay open late at night. Everyone can have safely lit lamps, right? So that becomes the first oil industry. Then after that, we become industrialized with whale oil, where we get to the area of like Moby Dick, that kind of point in our history where Queequeg comes into Sag Harbor,
right?
And then we have this other weird little point where it's so funny. It's like 1905 or around there. We also have the points of, I think we have the Bulliva Watch Factory, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
that starts, and then we also had an ice factory over in Watermill. We had ice harvesting, and that was its own big industry out here too. And so we wind up having this point where we're also incorporating from an agrarian society to an industrial society. And this is before we even become that much of a hot destination for tourism.
Right. Now, remember, this happened first in Sag Harbor, though. So Sag Harbor became, that's why Sag Harbor incorporated, I think, as far back as the 1840s as a village. So they were the first, for many years, they were the downtown of the South Fork, right? They had industry, whaling, and then went from that into various manufacturing concerns. The watch case factory, that was originally the Fahey's watch case factory, that dated to 1881. And that came after some other, manufacturing enterprises failed or they burned down. But in the rest of East Hampton Town, if you exclude Sag Harbor, it was still very agricultural till around the turn of the century. And a big inflection point actually was in the 1890s. With one very obvious thing, the railroad. Railroad came to East in 1895, and that really began to change things. Remember, before the 20th century, East Hampton didn't even have a police force. If you go back to, the first police they had constables. I told you, constables were elected.
Yeah.
They would be the, enforcement of the town, but you didn't have an actual police force until I think the 1910s, around then. Now, I don't know about Sag Harbor Village, but in the rest of the town. So it was a very simple government. There was no zoning. There wasn't much regulation of anything. That's why the trustees for such a long time, the trustees managed their own land. And until 1851, when they lost the control of Montauk in a lawsuit by the Montauk proprietors, the trustees spent most of their time managing livestock on Montauk. And they lost control of Montauk, which was the result of a lawsuit in 1951. The trustees for the rest of the 19th century didn't have a lot to do. They got involved in litigation. They had the famous Kirk lawsuit over seaweed, up on Northwest Harbor. but they didn't have a lot to do, and there wasn't really that much for the town government to do. But as you got into the 20th century, the first real schools, modern schools, they came in the 1890s. The railroad came in the 1890s. You know, you really, if you want to date back, when did East Hampton begin to change over to a more modern community? You'd probably 1890s would probably be the time you'd look at.
That it's a very interesting point, because at that point you can no longer just be a generalist agrarian society. You have to your hand is forced, because you are now connected, whether you like it or not, to a larger population center.
Tourism is growing. In the 1890s, the Maidstone Club is formed, right? That was the, really
Okay.
center for the second homeowners who were, beginning like, obviously nothing like today in terms of numbers, but there was this, the summer people began to arrive in East Hampton in the late 19th century, and by the 1890s, they're forming a club. So a lot began to change at that time, and that's why in the early 20th century the town government begins to get modernized, and of course over time it begins to grow. You had to have assessors. Actually, you had assessors earlier on, but assessors, tax receiver, and then eventually, all the administrative positions that come with government.
And you also see the fact that East Hampton Village has to incorporate itself in 1920, right after everything that you're talking about. That's what I was just looking up there for 2 seconds, because I'm just like, everything. You're right. Every single thing kind of pushed itself forward to these weird little hinge points, and of course, East Hampton Village would have to go and incorporate itself, because it's in a unique position where it's hyper-populated, has a bunch of people coming over there. The rest of the town is developing at its own pace, really.
Well, what caused the incorporation, or led to the incorporation of the village, was that the town was not ready to adopt zoning, and by 1920, or post World War I, you could kind of begin to see that the population of the New York metropolitan area was going to grow. There would be more people out here, and obviously people in East Hampton wanted to have some control over their future. That's why. So the village incorporated so they could have zoning. The town took another 37 years. The town didn't have zoning until 1957.
Really?
Interesting fact, by the way. 1957, East Hampton Town adopted zoning. Southampton Town adopted zoning. Shelter Island adopted zoning. As far as I know, and I'm not certain about this, Southold may have also adopted zoning, all in 1957.
That's really funny, because it's also the time right after 1955 where the justices also become council members.
Right.
So you have that shift. You have that shift starting to happen, where people have to become more specialized, more towards a legislator, rather than just more of a generalist. So it has to. So it makes total sense that it takes on that's tone and that structure.
Well, I think zoning too is a function of what was happening on Long Island, post World War II. The growth was beginning to move east. The town had actually considered zoning in the 1930s, early 1930s, but then the Depression hit. There was no growth. There's no reason to move it on, and then the war hit. So the whole zoning idea revived after World War II, and then it began to take shape in the 1950s.
That makes complete sense. It's funny because, with population increases and with changes of technology, it seems that we have to adapt and change at every single hinge point. And sometimes, so one of the things actually I wanted to talk to you about today is, aside from that, and I don't mean to try to put you on the spot on this one, but you mentioned something was really interesting that I didn't really factor in, which is that before the Montauk, no, they weren't private. They were, what were they called? Proprietors?
Montauk proprietors were the nominal owners of Montauk from first purchases in the 1600s until Montauk was sold at auction to Arthur Benton. That was in 1879. Okay,
so what I'm wondering is that there's that lawsuit that you mentioned, the seaweed lawsuit. Aside from, I guess this is interesting, because what lawsuits or cases have been very large precedent-setting cases for East Hampton in that regard, which have because those two definitely shaped our community 100%.
Well, you're since it's election day, one of the questions here is how have town elections affected the town, and this kind of ties into the litigation. A lot of this has to do with land use. To my mind, the most important period of time in the town was from 1979 to 1983. There were three town elections. From let me just think. It was I think the Republican. There was a brief period of time in the early part of the Depression when the Democrats had control of the town board.
Yeah.
And the Democrats, I think it was in the 35 election, the Republicans retook control of the town board from 1935. And they then won every election up until 1979. So there was a 44-year period when, East Hampton used to refer, it's a rock-ribbed Republican town. Suffolk County was a Republican county. Parts of it still are. But East Hampton was a really Republican town. And that persisted. The Democrats had almost nothing to say with town government. They occasionally had elected officials, but from 1936 until 1979, 1980 is when the Democrats took office. The Republicans controlled East Hampton. So there was a 44-year period. It was all the Republican governance. The Democrats won the 79 election with three council people. They didn't control the supervisor seat, but they had three of the five council seats. And they began to make changes in terms of the town zoning. They pushed through legislation to allow the town planning board to mandate clustering, compulsory clustering in subdivisions. They pushed forward the farmland study, which Tom Thorson, the town planner, undertook. And then in 1981, the Democrats were disorganized and the Republicans swept the 1981 elections. And what they did immediately, right after the election day, that this was not part of the campaign platform, they announced, like within a week or two after election day, it came out that the Republicans were going to abolish the town planning department. This is November 1981. The cat got out of the bag a little bit too soon because it gave the lame duck Democrats enough time to craft a local law, which they had time to adopt after public hearing, that said you can't abolish a town planning department without a public hearing. So the Republicans take control in 1982. They won the 1981 election. Now they have a 3-2 majority on the town board. They go forward with a public hearing in January of 1982 to abolish the town planning department, fire the town planner, Tom Thorson. And they were doing this under the guise of they were going to hire an outside planning consultant as a cost-saving measure. Nobody believed it, okay, and it wasn't true. It was all about, the town was under intense development pressure at that time. 1982, everything was on the chopping block. All of Hither Woods was up for subdivision. The Grace Estate was proposed for subdivision. Barcelona Neck was proposed for subdivision. All these things that are parkland today, at the time, were proposed for residential subdivisions. Wow. The remaining Bell Estate, there was a motel proposed on Duck Creek and 3 Mile Harbor. So the town was under tremendous development pressure, and the new incoming Republican majority of the town board said, we're going to abolish the town planning department. So this did not go over well, and the subsequent political history of the town from 1981, 82 onward is affected by what happened. So there had to be a public hearing. There was a public hearing held in January 1982. They had to move to the East Hampton High School auditorium, which was almost filled. They had almost 1,000 people there. And the overwhelming sentiment of the people speaking, including plenty of longtime Republicans, was, what are you doing this for? This is crazy. And so there was a brief interregnum. The town supervisor, whose name I will not mention right now, but she was a woman supervisor. She initially said at the end of the hearing, okay, I've heard you. I'm not gonna go forward with this. And about a month later, they slipped an agenda item onto the agenda before a town board meeting, and there was a 3-2 vote. The Republican majority abolished the town planning department.
Wow.
That set the stage. I mean, you have to remember at that time, East Hampton was probably a 2-1 or greater enrollment advantage for the Republicans. Now, today, I don't know the exact numbers, but today, apparently, the Democrats actually, their enrollment is greater than the Republicans. But everything changed between 1981 and 1983. Yeah, so you asked, how do elections change what happens? Well, so the 1983 election, I was around for that. That was November 8th, 1983, and that literally changed the future of East Hampton Town. The Democrats won that election, took control of the town board, only 3-2, but they were able to change the course of the town in terms of its planning policies and zoning and development, open space preservation, all of that. Had the election in 1983 gone the other way, this town would not look like it does today.
That is insane how much of a hinge point that is. And it's so crazy that because I almost can't imagine the alternate future. I mean, because so many things are now, are taken for granted, like Barcelona Neck being subdivided. I could see it happening. I just don't, it's just kind of like, wow, it takes a while. It takes a while to think about that. And also you think about the situation we would be in, especially out here with our water quality, if that were to happen.
Graphic, think of all the implications of it.
It's tough. Everything, one of the things that I don't enjoy about election time is that everyone's a genius in hindsight. Every year, with the improvement of our scientific knowledge and our overall cultural knowledges that happen, you make better informed decisions. I think most people make the best decisions that they have with the information that they have at the time. And you know what I mean? It's most likely like, is it's a bad actor. It's like, no, let's just first it's local politics. Every single person has to live with the consequences of their actions. Literally. You literally have to stay, like most people that I know, it's one of the reasons why I like local is the fact that the accountability for your actions in the long term is built into the system.
Yeah.
So, now we think, oh man, that was fantastic that, Barcelona Neck didn't get developed and that these other places didn't get developed because our waterways would be literal sewage at that point. Think about that with the old school septic systems, with the old school everything. It would be insane. One of the things that I always wonder is, I think that you talked about now that the Democrats have a larger majority out here, I think a lot of that also got exacerbated because of COVID, because of the large, flight from the city to out here. Most likely culturally, we're going to be dealing with that demographic shift for the foreseeable future. And this isn't just here in East Hampton. It is all across the nation.
Other rural areas, sure.
And one of the things that happened is that it was a compounding factor of people can work from home, and the cities, people did not feel safe for a multitude of reasons in their cities. So now we have areas that were rural, they had their own way of life, having to deal with larger influxes of people. Sometimes some rural areas are really appreciative of this. I think Rochester, for instance, is actually having a thing where people they'll pay you to move to Rochester, which is one of those.
Money talks, right?
Hey, money talks. It's interesting. It's the whole entire shifts of people out here. So that was fascinating, though.
Jason, just to follow up with that, but because of technology,
yeah,
you live almost anywhere. And in many kinds of jobs, you can live almost anywhere and still do your job. Just do it remotely.
Yeah, so. And that's what's going to change. And now we will have to wonder about how that will change the demographics of voting and its subsequent laws for the foreseeable future. Because I think local law matters so much in people's lives. And yet again, it's always deprioritized in our national media because the fact that you really can't sell ads on it on a large scale.
That's right.
Yeah. What's up?
It's local. I mean, you're right. You can't monetize it the way you do things on the national level.
No, you can't.
But the point I was trying to make, the one point I do want to make is COVID certainly accelerated this process, exacerbated it, and we know that it had negative impacts on the ability to find affordable housing locally. But the demographic change and the voting electorate change began with that early 1980s, change in effect in town politics,
True.
and progressed since then.
Oh, absolutely true. I just think that it's there's definitely been a shift out here that I can see, and just the sheer amount of people who moved out here from the city. And yeah, we're I think both all the counties, I mean, I think all the towns out here are going to have to deal with it. I mean, personally, I've always my stepdad for years had the Peconic County sticker,
Right, right.
you know,
Yeah.
and I think about that on the regular basis where, I'm really happy that people are we're voting for our legislator, and we're active on that. But, not for nothing, I always think about the fact that we should have a bit more say when it comes to things along those lines.
I will say this though, the Peconic County movement, even though it never resulted in the Peconic County, it did have its effect, and it did make Suffolk County pay closer attention to the East End. Today, would I think we need a Peconic County? No, I would say, the day has passed, but it served the purpose, and it had an effect.
I don't know. I personally think that, like, and this is my only retort to the idea of having the Peconic County. This is my only retort to it, is that because of how the population density is so different, really it's after you go from the William Floyd Parkway onward. It's a very different, it's a weird, it's a demarcation line. It's right there.
Yep.
And right afterwards, you have effectively a completely different shift in how people make their living, and how people also go about their daily lives. Like when I'm up island seeing my wife's family, it's, hey, you want to go out to dinner? It's 5-minute drive. You know what I mean? There's like, everything's open. Oh yeah, everything's open late. Just go to whatever box store. You're set. That's not the life out here. That's not the life that people want out here. They want a different kind of life. They want a different lifestyle. And so I think things like affordable housing become a greater question, because how do you tackle the idea of affordable housing with also the retention of the prized idea of community character? And I don't think that we're going to get that from a legislative body that is disconnected from that problem. Again,
I think the solution though for that is going to be local. That's literally going to be a town solution. It won't be a county. The county is not going to, figure out how to provide affordable housing in East Hampton town. The town will have to do that.
I know, but the problem is it puts every single town. So, all right, our problems don't stop and start at Town Line Road.
Right.
And if there is going to be a affordable housing solution in my limited viewpoint, it would have to be a large cooperation from all of the towns that are around the Peconic, effectively. Because
on the South Fork, I mean,
South Fork,
most of our population is going to be East Hampton, Southampton, the working population year round.
That's true, but the thing is that there's also a great deal of affordable housing problems happening in Southold as well. I know them as well, and so you don't only get the economies of scale where your taxpayers would wind up getting the better return on investment for such a project. Like, let's just say hypothetically there was a large area in, like, let's say the Riverhead area, and effectively all of the towns pitched in together to create effectively an incorporate its own village, its own governing body of a village that would be for mixed, like a rent controlled kind of feeling, where some of the units are on market and some of the units are subsidized. We would all collectively on the East End wind up getting a very large return on that investment. Now, the problem is, though, it would require all of the towns to cooperate together, effectively creating the Peconic County in legislation. It would create I don't have the right word for it, but something along the lines of the exquisite corpse. You know what I mean? Where you're like, oh, okay, everyone's working together anyway. Oh, this is what we intended years ago.
Well, that's why the Peconic County movement had traction for such a long time. I just think that we've reached a point where it's too complex to do it today.
It's tough. It's a tough one. Yeah.
And you know, you are creating another level of government and all that stuff. But it did cost Suffolk County though for a couple of decades to start to pay closer attention to the East End. Because they didn't want the formation of Pecona County.
Oh yeah, for their own reason. Yeah, for a clear reason. Richard, it's been fantastic talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you again at many meetings. And thank you very much for participating in our democracy.
Very welcome, Jason. Thank you. Take care
You
now.
rock. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Okay. Let's see. All right, so I am over here right now. We switched over to more of a green screen setup. We're trying to show the background over there. Zach's going to try to go and take the asset in the back and maybe see if we can make this work a little bit better. Zach, if you want to double click on that and maybe just lower some. You got it? All right, thank you, buddy. All right, Zach, they can hear me on broadcast? All right, so I'm sending out live? All right, cool. So, yeah, we still have yet to have any of the districts report in, which is to be expected because, the polls haven't closed yet. So, but we stay with tradition and we usually start a little bit early and we just continue on and, how it goes here at Public Access. Let's just see what's happening with the legislature. If anything's reported in on that, of course not. Town councils. Don't know why. So sometimes this is what happens is that you'll have when you're going through this, it does get a little buggy. Well, not buggy. Maybe that's the wrong term. Hard to navigate. Let's go through everything one more time. Okay, the page does automatically refresh for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Again, it seems that no districts have reported in yet, so it's nothing really to talk about, except for our next interview with Hugh King, our town historian. Hugh came in, I believe it was last Friday, and talked to us, and it was great. One of the things that I've always respected about Hugh is the passion that he shows for history, but also he shows for this community. And I think it's fair to say that our community would lack a certain voice if it wasn't for him around. So we're going to go roll to that right now. Go for it, Zach.
Hello, my name is Jason Nauer, and I am here today with our town historian, Hugh King. And what we're going to be talking about today is the history of East Hampton elections and how they've really shaped and formed our community, especially as we grow, as we change from really a settlement to a rural aspect. Oddly enough, we were kind of like a global player there for a while when it came to whale oil and the importance of whale oil. Well, we know from Fishhook, Mulford, and all these other points. How we've evolved now into a part of the nation, and then as we've gone, how our elections and our electoral system has shaped us as a community a little bit. So we're going to be touching on just a few of these points today. And so again, this is our fantastic historian, Hugh King, who's right with us today.
Good. I agree with everything Jason said. Thank you for coming. All right. Well, I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I wrote down some notes.
Please.
Okay. Well, first of all, this town or settlement was pretty much governing itself between 1648 and 1664
Really?
before we became part of the colony of New York that took over. Now, everything was done at the town meeting, okay? And the town meeting was held in the meeting house, which we all call a church now. And the meeting house, the first meeting house was down near Town Pond, okay? And you had to attend the meeting or otherwise you were fined. And what did they do at the town meeting? They elected 3 men to kind of run the affairs of the town. They elected a constable, but the most important person they elected was the recorder. Thomas Talmadge was the first recorder. The recorder eventually became the town clerk.
Huh.
And why is this recorder important? We have all the town records starting from 1648. We have the original records in the Long Island Room, and then they have been transcribed. So you can now go back and look to see what was going on in this town from its beginning because of an election of a recorder.
That's insane. So that person probably had to be one of the most literate and well-versed people in the town that you would have in that position.
Thomas Talmadge was the first recorder.
Wow.
And the other thing about that, and this is a little personal, my wife Loretta, when she found the information out about the Goody Garlic witchcraft case,
Yes.
it's in the town records.
Yes.
The beginning of the case and all the testimony is in the records. So because of an election, and that election of the recorder, we have a pretty good history of our town.
Well, and to your point, that election, it set a precedent. It set a precedent of the type of person that you want to be your town recorder and eventually your town clerk because of the importance of it. So there was an inherent acknowledgement of the people of East Hampton, even at that early stage, that our history is important, the writing of it and the recording of it, and so that way we understand where we're going forward with.
And you will find if you did not attend
That's
the town
interesting.
meeting. And then I did find someplace there was actually a town crier. Or they would send somebody around to beat a drum, and that meant that there was going to be a meeting. That's how, you know, the settlement was very small, all around the pond.
Yeah.
And maybe went up to where the Hook windmill is now, but that's it.
Yeah.
That was, so you could do that. And then you mentioned Samuel Fishhook Smulford.
Yeah.
Well, there's another reason why elections are important. He was elected to the Colonial Assembly, but of course he got in Dutch with everyone because he told the governors that you cannot tax us out here on the whale oil because we have no say on how the money's being spent.
Yep.
He's talking about taxation without representation. This is 1700 now.
Yep.
And also, of course, he said there's no reason that we need to take out a license to go after this fish, this whale.
Yes.
So he was way ahead of his time, and that's because he was elected by the people here to go into the Colonial Assembly.
Yeah, and the Colonial Assembly, it didn't have, from my recollection, it didn't have a lot of power. It was very much kind of just like, you know, it was almost
Rubber
like
stamping what the
a
colonial
little
code.
bit. Yeah. There wasn't too much of it, and in a weird way, I would argue that it kind of gave people a taste of what they wanted, and
That's a good way to put it. Yeah,
without
yeah,
actually
yeah.
giving them the substance, you know.
He was kicked out of the assembly too. of
Good for
course.
him.
Yeah. But he got reelected again. So, yeah. And then, of course, you go on to, you mentioned one of the things, the Duncan patent.
Of course, that is what that. I mean, how has that? So that bit, how has? So please give me the history of that.
I'm not so. The Duncan patent was started in 1686. Governor Duncan gave the people in East Hampton the authority to organize and control their waterways, and he provided for a group of people called trustees to manage the town's waters.
God.
And he provided that they be elected. See, once again, now, you know, in the early history of our town, the trustees were running the town.
Yeah.
There was a supervisor elected, but it really had no power at all. It was the trustees. You know, they were in charge of the cattle drives to Montauk.
Yeah.
They also ran the church.
Wow.
Provided to fix the meeting house, hired the minister, and they were elected. And I think that was something that, by the way, this group is still in existence
Yes,
today. And one of the places where they used to meet is still here, the townhouse.
they are. Yeah.
So we still have the meeting place where the trustees met. Now, and where did they vote? They may have voted in that townhouse at one time. I'm not sure. I can't. It was pretty much of the time in the meeting house. And then later on in Clinton Academy, where it became Clinton Hall, that was voted there. You know, I'm going to skip ahead. We have, you know, there were no election districts until about 1900.
Really
All the election was done at the town meeting, and it was in April.
interesting.
Yeah, that's when things got done. And it wasn't until 1900 that they divided the town into different districts. So if you lived in Springs, you voted at Ashwell Hall.
Okay.
That place is still standing.
Yep.
If you lived in Amagansett, you voted at Myancoma Hall. That building is still standing. If you voted in part of the East Hampton Village, you voted at Oddfellows Hall. That building is still standing. And then you also voted at Clinton Academy or Clinton Hall. That building is still standing. And then another place you voted was the Hook Schoolhouse.
Oh, okay.
And that building is still standing. So the buildings that we began voting in at the turn of the 20th century are still standing.
Wow.
Our election polling places.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
So we left off at that point before we skipped ahead.
Yeah,
we
I
left
know.
off at the point of the trustees.
Yeah.
And how the trustees become elected officials here, and about how those elected officials, they really start to shape the way that East Hampton really manages their natural resources. It becomes not only commercial, but also an element of natural resource management right there. And so they were effectively running the town completely in a sense of autonomy. All the way up until the American Revolution, or until we get incorporated, correct? Or
Well, the trustees, during the American Revolution, we still had town meetings, you know.
Yeah,
It's in the records, and probably wasn't as.
we were occupied at that point.
Yeah, so there wasn't much going on.
No.
And then after the revolution, no, the trustees were still, that's a good question. When did the kind of power shifted from the trustees
To a
running the
town
town
board.
to a supervisor?
Mhm.
We didn't have town board members, you know, for a long time. You know, in the beginning of the 20th century, the supervisor and 4 justices of the peace, they were elected to run the town. It wasn't until 1965 that Eddie Ecker was voted as a councilman that we started the idea of council people. But before that, it was justices of the peace.
It's
Who were
interesting.
elected by the people.
No, when we
I'm
get to
skipping
this,
around. I
no, it's
know, go back.
no, it's
Pull
fine.
back, pull
It's
back
fine.
when you
It's
wanna
fine.
go
But like
back.
when we're going, over through how all of these points have shifted and created what we consider today East Hampton. And the way I look at elections and elected bodies and elected officials, there's a lot of times where like I'll be watching a meeting, and people have a tendency to want to pile on to whomever is in the elected position. Why aren't you doing this, or why aren't you doing that? And I always consider our elections and our elected officials more as a reflection of the current culture and needs of the time. You're not going to have somebody be very progressive on the environment unless the culture that surrounds them is progressive on the environment.
All right, well, here's the point I want to make on that. This terrible idea at times that every decision has to be win-win. No,
Yeah.
that is not correct. A decision needs to be made, and who's going to benefit the most from it? Some people are not going to be happy with the decision. That's what you want your elected leaders to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you must listen to the community, but sometimes the community doesn't have the point right. And that's where the elected official has to come in. So when I ever say we got to have a decision that everyone's going to like, no,
Fair.
that cannot happen all the time. It just cannot.
Fair, but it's always tough when it's just like you're talking about like threading the needle between the point of doing what the official doing what they're doing, believing to do right as a representative, as someone who has been elected to represent with their sense of education, background, ethics, all of these points. That's why we elect people, to lead us in those certain ways.
I think we also need to elect people who are not afraid.
Yeah.
If you do not like my decision and the way I'm governing, do not vote for me. Vote for someone else. Now, that's easy for me to say.
Exactly.
Because I'm not up there getting hammered, you know. Uh, but that is part of it. And I think the other thing is many people, they're thinking about their own personal concern in something, which is important. You have to listen to them. But that doesn't mean that it's best for everybody. Because
Mhm.
now, the wonderful thing about our elected leaders here, you get a chance to go to town hall and confront them and tell them. And
Exactly.
that's so important. And the town board, even though they have a 3-minute rule, they're they let people, speak their mind. And I think that's very important.
You can always also submit a letter, you know, and if you ever wanted to go into something which is very long form, like, you know, when we do our stuff here, when it comes to the phone lines and people going there, the way I think about it is like it's not the avenue of communication, it's a avenue of communication, you know, and so it does go back. It always boils down to
The other thing is now that's easy for me to say this again.
Sure.
Practice. When you show up to do a talk, here it is, I have it, blah, 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 blah. But when people want to go on and just kind of talk off the cuff, it just goes, your message gets spread out and it's not focused. If you've got something in front of you and you're focused and you've practiced it before you go there,
Yeah.
then you get your point across and then everybody is not held hostage to your speech.
You did the homework.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Now,
did, yeah.
When I show up at the town board meetings, I just don't show up and think, okay, what am I going to say today? Now I'll just start talking. No, this stuff doesn't just come out of my head. Before I get there, I go over what I'm going to say. I practice what I'm going to say. So when I go up there, I can make the point and then leave. And then somebody else gets a chance. Now, a lot of times people don't have time to do this. I understand that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
But it goes back to the idea of every single person has their own autonomy, agency, and priorities because of their own life and their needs. And again, like that's where I always fall back to the idea of like, you know, you can have a person, you can going back to the core idea of elections, where communication of your points, communication of where that person is coming from, that elected official, communication with their community. I think it always has to start there. That no matter what happens with our elections, like for instance, you could not have had a person who like we had a large. Let's go back to like East Hampton for a second historically. We had a very large Quaker community in the East End overall, not necessarily East Hampton, but around like we had Shelter Island,
right, yeah.
and so there was interactions with people who the Quakers were notoriously abolitionists, very much so. They were always against it. Now, as a community, though, you know, you have to build and change people's mind. Changing people's minds and points of view is not a light bulb. And even if you are elected and you say, I know what's right and I'm going to do it, it's hard because at that point it doesn't seem to, it's not going to be really governing through the reflection of the representational government. At that point, it becomes authoritarian. Even when you know that you're in the right, even when you know that you're doing the right thing. So it does, to me, always boil down to communication with the community to show them why your point matters. And they're going to have their points too, their counterpoints.
Well, don't you think one of the most important things our elected leaders need to do is listen?
Every day.
Listen. Even if you think that what they're saying is completely wrong, you have to listen. And I think that's so important. Now, how much time do we have here?
We have as much time as you want.
Okay.
And whenever you say no, you want to end, we'll find
I wanted to
a
talk
nice way.
when you were talking about elections. I'm jumping around.
Please, I'm fine with that.
Okay, all right. Sometimes an election is important because of what didn't happen in the election.
Great point.
And the first one I want to talk about is in 1910, Frederick Gallatin used to moor his boat down in where Maidstone Park is now. And he decided he wanted to give that land, he owned that land down there, to the town to be used as a park. So we said, okay, I'm going to give you that land, sell it to you for $1. and you have to name it Maidstone Park, and everyone has to get a chance to use it. So that was a proposal that was
Really?
that the voters in East Hampton had a chance to vote on. That election was important because they voted yes,
Yeah.
the first public park. But
Wow.
also at this time, there was another proposal to buy the entire Northwest as a forest reservation for $20 an acre. And it got voted down. So sometimes in elections, it's important because of what didn't happen.
Oh,
Yeah.
man, $20 an acre, yeah.
Yeah.
That was
It
overpriced.
gone. Yeah. And there was another one, of course, this is more recent, the Community Preservation Fund.
Yeah.
You know, when the voters approved that proposal to do that, we began saving land out here. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it's not a community preservation fund, it's a land preservation fund. Because when they decided to do this, which is a wonderful idea and protects the water underneath our ground, there was so much that's important. There was another part of it I thought was missing. Let's also prepare some land so we can build some housing on it so people can stay here and live and work. And that part of it wasn't there at the beginning.
It wasn't, but it also goes back to the idea that when the Community Preservation Fund passed, what year was that? I want to say it was like, actually, let me just look at
You
that.
could
East, because
90s maybe?
I want to say it,
1990s?
yeah, I want to say it was definitely that.
Yeah.
So it was something along those lines, and I'm hoping that somebody is angry and yelling at their TV right now because they know the answer.
Okay.
But when we think about those needs, the community at that point, its its need for affordable housing or to build something, you know, it's hard because you wind up tying in the idea of, well, what about the free market? Why isn't it that it's just a free market item? Or is it a non-market item? Should it be a partially subsidized element or an area that there? And that becomes a very sticky situation. And that, in my opinion, boils down to the idea that, you know, as much as we want to, if you want to progress your idea or your agenda, it has to happen with tough conversations, easy conversations with people where you're kind of like just talking about it and getting your point across. You know, where it's just like, you know, for instance, you know, if we were to look at, you know, the uses of our land right now after COVID, when we've all lost so many friends because their housing is gone, this is the one time I've seen both parties universally agree, wow, we really need affordable housing. We really need this. There's not even a question about it. And everybody wants to pull the clock back 10, 15 years when things were easier and cheaper and land wasn't bought up, you know? And so, you know, there's always the problem of dealing with today's issues versus tomorrow's projections. And
the only reason I brought it up is because that wasn't done when they initially started the Community Preservation Fund. To me, it should blunt the criticism now of, we don't want that in our neighborhood. No, we can't have, there'll be too much traffic, you know, the usual suspects.
Absolutely.
Come out. And I think that needs to be blunted by the fact that it wasn't done, you know, in the past. That's just my point.
No, you're 100% right. It was not done in the past, and if it was done in the past, we'd be in a very different situation now.
You still can't find that date?
I can't find the date. I find the audits, I find everything else, but I can't find the exact
Good thing
date.
the phone lines aren't on.
I know, seriously, we would have so many people yelling at us, and rightfully so. But
Well, I mean, I think it's in the 1990s. It's not that we're.
I'm willing to say it's at least in the 90s. But you know, so here's another one that I was thinking about just now as we're talking about this, because I know Fred Thiel was a huge proponent of the Community Preservation Fund. I also remember the idea of Peconic County, and my stepdad would still have the little bumper sticker on his truck for years. The idea of Peconic County, and that idea of a county that surrounds just the
Yeah,
Peconic
but
Bay.
that never came up for a vote,
It
did
never
it?
came up for a vote,
Oh, okay.
but it's also this sense of people having. I think when we think about an election, we have to think about the history of people wanting better representation for their points to be heard, their agency to be heard, and having that power and control over their life and what they need.
Well, there
And,
used to be, it used to be a board of supervisors that used to meet in Suffolk County before a Suffolk County legislature. I think each of the supervisors would meet, and that would determine much of Suffolk history. And I think that was done away with when the Suffolk legislature was formed. I think. Now I'm not. I'm a little shaky, but I think that's right. Did you find the date?
I found the date. It was 1998.
That's what we said.
That was what we said. It was a late 90s.
Gee, 1998.
And it
That's not that long ago.
No, and it began in 1999.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's also like we have to remember that our elections are going to really shape how we move forward, because I can look at that as kind of like a pivot point where, I mean, if I think about the history of this community, right? We go from, like I said, a settlement, we go to a colony, we go to integration, and then we become, in some parts of out here, become industrialized because of the whale oil industry. Sag Harbor kind of becomes quasi-industrialized.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of that processing that happens, but then you have the fact that we become really a rural community, and now we're at this weird tipping point where we have a rural community that's trying to coexist with not quite a suburban community, but something along those lines, because we had so many people move out here from COVID. People who were second home buyers said, I'm not living in the city, I'm living out here now. So we're changing our community, the demographics of our community are changing.
Well, now because you said of that moving, one of the elections that changed things out here was the election of Judith Hope.
Yeah, huge.
The first woman supervisor in the town of East Hampton. But, people who today lament the fact that one party is in control of our town board need to look back into the 40s and the 50s and the 60s when another party was in complete control of of town government. So, and it's never a good idea. There's always a need for dissent. You need somebody like the press needs to hold people's feet to the fire. Even LTV can have programs that hold the town government feet to the fire, especially when you actually film all the town meetings. That's so important.
Yeah, accountability.
Because people who can't come to the meetings can watch them.
Yeah.
You can see. And then you can call in, right?
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So I thought that election, it was also a shift in our town from a Republican majority to becoming more of a Democratic majority in town government. That was the beginning of that shift. And even in the 1980s, when my father was on the town board, there was still a Republican presence, but it was beginning to fade because of all the people who moved out here, or who voted out here, I should say. They changed their registration, I think, from the city to here.
Yeah. And Judith Hope, actually, we owe her a great debt, LTV personally, because she was the one who we have to take a minute for Fraser Dougherty. She was the one who actually gave Fraser, the go ahead to make LTV.
Is that right?
To have LTV actually contracted to do it. Before that, he was filming it, but he was filming it not like as an official whatever.
No, he'd show up at the town board.
Actually, he would show up. I don't know if we can get a shot of this. Give me a second. We keep this. I actually love this camera.
Oh my goodness.
We keep the Ikegami.
It's a what?
This is an Ikegami. It was an old school camera. This is what Fraser got, and this is what he would run around everywhere with. This camera was actually pretty freaking awesome, if you ask me. And I actually still love the way it sits on his shoulder. Mr. Ikegami from Japan, he used to build some he used to build some great tech.
Well, didn't LPD begin also having election night coverage?
Yeah.
I remember Bill Fleming used to
Yeah.
have his show here, with Fred Thiel, I think, was on it.
Sure.
I think he had Larry Cantwell at times. I can't remember who else.
I filmed one of his last ones, and I gotta tell you, there's no other Bill Fleming.
No.
There's no other Bill Fleming, and it's just kind of like, that's why I'm like, all right, let's talk about history or something, because there is no one like him. He was one in a million, that guy, and we owe him a great debt as well. And that's the thing about that is that he talked about LTV with programming. Anyone is able to, if they want to go and discuss their points, talk about things, they're able to come in here and rather quickly have a show, have an element of a platform where they can go and discuss.
You have when I'm watching LTV, all of a sudden, like between shows, there's a whole litany of people who have shows. You put it up there, everyone's show.
Yep.
Going up. The people making food.
Yep.
The people talking about plays. So
Yep.
there's a lot more shows than I remember in the past.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of outreach. But going back to the elections.
Okay, now here's another one.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize this. During the Civil War, the people in East Hampton elected a Democratic supervisor,
Interesting.
Stephen Hedges, and he, after being elected, and I think it was partly because of his influence, that he was sent to the city to buy substitutes, because to meet the quota that President Lincoln determined that each county or each place had to send so many soldiers to the war.
Really?
We went to the city and bought substitutes.
What do you mean?
This in the town records. It says we're going to spend $300 for substitutes from New York City to meet our quota for the war effort.
So when you bought a substitute, what was that so they voted on going to have.
He took the money, gave it to somebody in the city to go fight in the war. Now, the other classic, of course, is how did these soldiers during the Civil War, in 1864, how did they vote? Absentee ballot.
Absentee.
Now, if you can use an absentee ballot during the Civil War, there's no reason why we can't use it today. This whole idea, they're terrible, it's off, how are we going to do it? Hello. Now, I don't know if men in East Hampton voted by absentee ballot who were serving in the Civil War. There were about 150 men, I think, from East Hampton.
I think our military, for the most part, I know people who are overseas, and I think Hudson, if you're in the control room, you can go and tell me, but I know that a lot of people who are in the military vote through absentee ballots. Hudson has a lot of friends who are.
But during the Civil War, they were able to do it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So it's not some new concept. I didn't realize that, and I never thought of it before until I was reading a book about Lincoln. And elections are always funny because there has been historically, like, I can't talk about that for East Hampton, but I do know for a fact Philadelphia was notoriously bad with their elections. So they were like, this came up for a while ago where they were doing a history of how Edgar Allan Poe died. Because Edgar Allan Poe, they found him dead in a ditch in Philadelphia. Oh.
And what happens is that everyone's like, well, why was he dead in a ditch in Philadelphia? He must have been some mad artist. It was also during the time of the elections there, where they would have press gangs effectively go and press you to say, you're going to go in there and vote for this guy. And then you'd be like, all right, I voted. And then they'd beat you up, put a different hat on you, and put you back in the line and say, now say that you're John Smith III. Go vote.
Oh, isn't that where the idea of a ticket came from? They used to give you a ticket with all the candidates on it before you went in. And then you put the ticket in that.
I guess so.
Yeah, that's where the idea, I didn't realize where the idea of a ticket came from. And there's another thing I didn't realize, or maybe we haven't investigated. When did they really start having debates in our town during
That's
elections?
an interesting idea. I don't think I'm going to find it on Google.
No, I don't
But
know either.
that's a really good one. So now we get to this idea of where are we? So we transitioned from
God, we're all over the place.
we transitioned from basically a colony to now we'll skip past the Articles of Confederation because I
Yeah,
think
they were
everyone
terrible,
does.
yes, okay.
Thank God for Shays' Rebellion.
Yeah.
And then we get over to the us being integrated into the nation. And so at that point, during that time, do you have any interesting little points for us, you know, as we start to integrate into becoming part of the United States?
No, I never thought about it that way. Well, one of the things that happened after the revolution in East Hampton, um, I don't think it had anything to do with an election. Well, it did. Governor Clinton, George
Yep.
Clinton was the governor of New York, and he came down to East Hampton. You know that?
Didn't know.
No, when East Hampton Academy opened up next to
Huh.
next to where the Star office is, right?
Okay.
It's built. He thought it was important because he lamented the fact that during the revolution, education had suffered.
Mm-hmm.
You know, schools were closed and nobody was really going to school. So when he heard about this academy, he came down here from Albany with a bell and gave it to the building, and then they called it Clinton Academy.
As a former docent, I should have known that.
So yeah, and then how did we do? Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I never really thought about it. We were still no.
We kind of
the
just-
trustees were still running even after the revolution. I think up until the time of the time of the Civil War, the trustees still held sway. They got out of the church in 1848.
Hmm.
They got away from running the church, and the church became then separate.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then still the supervisor's job, still I don't think was that powerful until probably the 20th century.
That's interesting. I guess it's because the needs of our community changed to a point where it wasn't so much about stasis, but about how do you deal with growth. Because the 20th century had the greatest explosion of human growth that we've ever experienced, good and bad. You know, I mean, I always think about this where you think about somebody from, I mean, even the mid 1800s, they have more in common with somebody from the 1600s than they do from the 1910s, 1920s.
Yeah, things have changed.
You know what I mean?
Good
So
idea,
if you think about it from like, oh yeah, well, how much did it change for life as a farmer between the mid 1800s, someone in the 1500s? Not, I mean, I know I'm skipping certain advancements, of course, but of course you could have somebody go back there and say, oh, this is how this was done, this is how this was done. Hop forward another 100 years, completely different world. Mechanization takes over. You know, engines and industrialization and everything changes, and it's funny because I guess you do need at that point you do need more of a controlled element of government, more of a concise element of government, so that way you can kind of deal with those problems as they come along. You know, how do you keep your character? I think that's a lot of our elections now is like how do we compete between character and progress? You know, I think that those are the two points that I always find fighting whenever I'm watching a meeting.
And of course, elections have changed so much now because of signs.
Yeah.
We have now you know where the traffic patterns are in our town because that's a spot where all the signs are. Really, you know.
They should be registered. All signs should be registered, and we should use them for later traffic studies.
Well, they also should be taken down after the election, please. One of the best signs, I have to tell you this, I can't help it. When you're the East Hampton's Recycling Center, right?
Yeah.
It's the dump.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's the dump.
So coming out of the dump, there are signs right across the street coming out of the thing.
Smart.
And one of them was dump alone. I just thought that was so good. Whoever thought of that one?
Someone's just like, I got an opportunity right here.
There was. And they're there this year too. There are signs out there as you come out of the dump. There they are.
They always will. They always will. There's always going to be certain points of.
You know, when I come here, I go down up Cedar Street, but instead of turning left, I go all the way to the end of Cedar Street where the new firehouse is, and then make a left. Well, you should see the signs that are there.
I do.
There's another a very important traffic place.
I know you can easily spot them. when we talked about, so we're talking about these elections, what are some notable ones that stand out into your mind, not only just as a historian, but as a resident of East Hampton?
Oh, I don't know. In the past, I like to tell this that, when I went to Springs to teach in 1965, Springs was considered kind of a backwater. They had monikers down there: Kings, Millers, Bennett's,
Yeah.
Greens. So you were kind of thought of as being a little behind the times. You should see what the kids we sent up to East Hampton High School from Springs. They were wonderful.
Mhm.
Okay, the reason I'm telling you this is because the longest serving supervisor in the town of East Hampton was from Springs, George Asa Miller, 26 consecutive years.
26.
Yeah, nobody will break that record.
Man.
And right behind him was Joseph Septimus Osborne from East Hampton, an upstreeter, who served as town clerk for 29 years.
Wow.
So that just stands out to me that someone would, nobody would even come close to that anymore. It's like Jack Perner at Montauk School Superintendent over
Yep.
almost 50 years.
Yep.
He was in the system. Nobody's going to break that record. But elections that stand out, I think the ones that would stand out if I had time to research would be surprises.
Mm-hmm.
That someone who we didn't think was going to win, but they won. Now, when has that happened in our town? Or I'm sure that the election of Judith Hope was a surprise to many because the Republicans had so much control over this town for many years. I don't know. I'd have to go think about it.
Regardless of party affiliation, what's interesting about Judith Hope is that it sets a precedent. Like right now, I think this might be the first time, and please correct me if I'm wrong, where we have 2 women running for supervisor.
And each village board and town board has more women than men on it for the first time in our history.
So there's a bit of hope there. There's a bit of hope there that we're not going to make some dumb decisions.
Tell Judith that.
I hope she's watching.
Yeah. No, I think that was a tremendously important election.
Yeah.
For two reasons: women, of course, and then the shift.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it was good or bad, but the shift from one party having control of the town to the beginning of another party.
Yeah.
And then you asked me about voter suppression.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we had it from the beginning.
Yep.
I mean, women and people of color did not vote, and even after the Civil War, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And it took into 1964, 65 for the Civil Rights Act to even push for people in the South who were not allowed to vote, or it was made difficult for them to vote.
Yeah.
You have to show up to register how many jelly beans are in the jar. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to register. That was going on in the 1960s.
Yeah.
And look at the push that women had to do to get a vote, and they just barely made it. I think the Tennessee legislature was the last one to ratify the amendment, and it made it by 1 vote. So in 1920, women could vote, and they blamed them for electing Warren Harding.
Well, you had to, but I think there's a lot of in politics you have to blame somebody for something.
Yeah, of course.
And so what are you going to blame? That one right now.
Yeah. But that's a good question. In my lifetime, I don't know if there were any surprising elections. What's surprising when my father got elected to be the town councilman.
There you go.
There's a plumber, and when he initially wanted to run, the party was reluctant to run him. First, he would have been too independent, and then he stuttered. So they said that he might not be able to communicate. So when my father made a commercial on WLNG, my mother was worried, what's going to happen? Oh my God, he's good. When my father was nervous, he didn't stutter. It's when he was relaxed that his.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So when he got elected, the party that didn't want to nominate him, but he got the nomination, was surprised. They were surprised. That was a surprise. There's all those years as being a plumber. And my father was a fair businessman,
Mm.
so he had a lot of empathy in our town. And he
That's
got elected.
fantastic.
But now that's the good news. There's another election. I don't know which one it was, but for a time there was concern about the planning board from many builders and developers that things were taking too long to get through the planning board. So there was a movement on that they were going to abolish the planning board. But the election that took place took care of that. And the
Really?
party that was thinking about doing it lost out. That was a very important
It's a
election.
very important
Because-
election.
The planning board, without the planning board, where would we be? So that was an important election. I can't remember what year it was now. I'm thinking in the 80s. It's in the 1980s. When my father was on the board.
Yeah, our appointed boards have a great deal of responsibility, and they have, I would say, just as much of a stake in the structuring of the town as the town board. The town board, in some respects, has this point where, because they're elected officials, everyone feels that they have to go there and yell at them for something, and I guess that's part of the pay. It's part of the compensation.
No,
You know what I
that's
mean?
it.
It's-
No, you
it's-
wanted the job.
You wanted the job, and that's part of the
Right,
job
right.
is hearing people's
Absolutely.
opinions at you, even when they're not placed at the right point. There's a lot of times where you can see somebody go up there and they'll be angry about something, and they'll say, "Well, that's really about the zoning board right now, or the planning board, or there's a variety of points there." And yeah, they hold a great deal of sway in how our community is run.
And their meetings are filmed.
Their meetings are
I
filmed.
think it was really important that the trustees' meetings started to get filmed.
Yeah.
Very, very important.
Yes.
You see what goes on, you see how they make decisions, you see why they make decisions, and you can have a chance to reflect on those decisions.
And there's it's a very large board. There's a lot of people there, and there is a variety of opinions. There is a variety of opinions and differences. And what's really cool about the trustees is the fact that you have so many different backgrounds there. I've seen people of all different kinds and all different opinions and stakes. And listen, maybe this is just me. I kind of like it. I like hearing an argument. I like hearing people have a point, because it means to me that a bad idea is going to be shot down eventually, or a good idea is going to get better, and a bad idea is going to get forgotten.
Or an idea you haven't thought of will come up.
There you go.
That's the other thing. More
Yeah,
people
synthesis.
get involved in making a point or picking a point up, you may think of something, you might find something you never thought of.
Yeah.
No, that's very, very important.
And I think that's
And you have to give these people credit, I know they wanted the job, but still, very few people show up at the town board or the trustee. Oh, we love you, we like what you're doing, thank you very much, goodbye. No.
Yeah.
People don't do that. They're right there to hammer away at somebody.
Thank you
So-
for your bad days. Thank you for the days that don't go too good.
Yeah.
And like that's a big one.
And now I want to thank our elected officials, because when I've gone to the town board meetings, I've been giving them homework assignments.
Yes.
In fact, you had one too.
Yeah. So I was working on that, about how much money it was equivalent for potash, and the hard part about that was because depending on the time that you were making the potash, but also whether it was potash, and then we got down the rabbit hole of the next refined point, which is pearl ash.
Oh God, I didn't even know there's such a thing existed.
I didn't know this either, because pearl ash was of a higher quality, and it was a precursor to sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda.
Where do you get pearl ash?
Pearl ash is a refinement of potash,
Oh.
and it was used for one more step. And it's just a rabbit hole finding out. But it's.
But the thing
Yeah. I
our
failed that one.
elected officials were actually doing the assignment and then
Yes.
reporting on it, which I thought was a wonderful example for the rest of the community. That the reason this history is important. We have to get away from this. Is me now, nothing to
Sure.
do.
Yeah.
We're not the upscale, fashionable, trendy, and unaffordable Hamptons. That's a terrible moniker that's been stuck on us. We have Wainscott. which has its own history. We have Amagansett, we have Montauk, we have Springs, we have the village of East Hampton, we have part of Sag Harbor. We all have our own history, and we're all a little hamlet or a village, not that big pancake syrup.
Northwest Woods used
Oh,
to
yes,
be
yes,
its own little
exactly.
hamlet in town,
Thank you.
and then it got. I mean, how did that? by
Well,
the
it
way,
wasn't a
excuse me,
town.
No, it wasn't a town. Sorry, not a town.
Yeah.
But it was a hamlet. It had a post office. It had a main street.
Had a post office?
Didn't it have a post
Not
office?
that I know.
All
Doesn't
right.
mean they didn't have one. They had a school.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's cool.
And then they had the port,
Yeah.
the Skellinger and
Yep.
Fishhook Smolford had warehouses down there.
Yeah.
That was the main reason that we were able to ship goods out of here. We did. That was a very active port.
Very
we're
active
finding out.
port.
And the reason I think it wasn't deep enough for the huge whaling ships that came. That's why they went to Sag Harbor, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
It makes sense.
yeah,
And the West
yeah.
Sag Harbor has the wharf and everything that's built
And how do
over
we
there.
know there was a school in Northwest? The minutes are in the Long Island room of that school.
Interesting.
And that's where I saw that they sold the ashes to farmers,
Yeah.
right? To put on. They did that at Ashwell Hall too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. When a farmer got their land, their first cash crop was the trees on the land and processing that into ash.
Oh,
And processing that into potash, because it's a good that you could then send. It's a refined good you would send over to England. When you send that good over to England, it later on you take the potash. It was really good for wool. So what you would do is you would take the potash, you'd put it into a large barrel that has all of your unprocessed wool, uncleaned wool. You put it on there, and it helps take off the oils. Like if you try to take wool, wool is really inherently oily. You can't really weave it until you have something like potash go on there,
Oh my
and
God.
that goes and helps strip the oils from that, and then allows you to process the wool.
I never knew that.
Yeah, it was a huge commodity, and it also allows you to help like make certain things like soaps and other stuff like that.
Oh
And
yeah, okay.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
and actually potash. You actually hear this term almost every day, because it later becomes potassium.
Oh my
Potassium.
God. Now,
Yeah.
wait a minute now. The ashes from the fire, from the
Yeah.
stove.
When they're boiled, when like so
How do you make potash out of it?
so potash. So it gets to a point. This has nothing to do with elections. So
It's going to be edited out. Don't worry.
yeah, we don't have time. So what happens is that if you take a large amount of in your fireplace, let's just say you have your fireplace and you have your wood there, and it's going, and it gets really really hot, and you have a fire pit, right? And it burns down, burns down, burns down. At the end of it, you get this white substance.
Mhm, okay.
That's potash. That's potash. That becomes the foundation for it. And then you can take that. Some people take it to this day after they have like a fire pit, and they take it and they spread it in their garden at certain points. Like if you're growing, I think it's tomatoes, do really well on a potassium with a potassium mix on them. Also, I think people spread it on top of their plants because it also acts as a deterrent against little insects, mites, and such. Yeah, there's a book called Caveman Chemistry that was pretty cool, and it kind of gets into this stuff about but again, that becomes this also goes down to I brought it back. It goes to the idea of commerce, the buying and selling of your goods,
Well, yeah.
and that is all down to elected officials making laws.
That's right. Who do you elect to the school board? And that school
Yeah.
board will sell the fire. So the elections are important.
There we go. We were talking about the elections the whole entire time, you. There we go.
Oh,
But-
God. That was great, though. Thank you very much.
I try. No, I went down a rabbit hole at a coffee shop and we started talking about that. So what happened is that we get to this idea of hamlets, the structuring of those hamlets, and how all of that feeds back to the culture and the structure of our community out here. And you were talking about this idea of the bougie Hamptons, the whatever overpriced, you can't get into them Hamptons. And you're right. That is it's a weird one. It's a bad service to us out here because it only looks at our community skin deep, and I think both parties would agree to that
Good way to put
100%.
that. Skin
You know,
deep, it's only skin deep.
it's only skin deep. You
Now,
know,
they used the word Hamptons in the late 1800s in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, but it meant something different. I think it meant, well, we don't want to write West Hampton, Southampton, Bridgehampton, so we'll just say the Hamptons. And it may have a little cachet to it, but not like we've got today. You know, what's going on in the Hamptons? Who cares? You know?
Yeah, just two guys hanging out in a bunker over here.
Yeah,
What's
right.
going on in the Hamptons?
That's what's happening in the Potash is happening.
Potash.
in there.
Potash is happening in the Hamptons. Yeah, so I don't know what else we can talk about
No,
right
I
now.
know.
I
Look
think
at my
we talked about.
notes. I told
Let's
you
see.
about that did this, women's suppression, Judy Hope, community preservation.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing that I think that we should also talk about. I mean, it's just a small thing to touch on, and
Yeah.
you've touched on it before. Is, you know, this community, it was founded. There's no nice way to say this.
It wasn't founded, it was
ta-
here already.
It was here
because the
already.
Montaukets
That's
were
what I was
here.
gonna say.
Yeah,
And-
the Montaukets were
and-
here, and now that you brought that up, this may not have anything to do with an election, but it did at one time. There's something called the Plain Sight Project,
Yeah, yeah.
and what that's done, it's changed the narrative in this town. In other words, instead of saying Josiah Hobart built the Mulford House,
Yeah.
no, he didn't.
No, he didn't.
He had it built. Who built it?
Yes.
Who built the Hook windmill? Now, Nathaniel Dominy did a lot of the work, but who went to Gardener's Island, cut the trees down, brought them back to fireplace? It was probably enslaved people.
Most
and,
likely.
And that has changed and very important narrative. And the other thing I've been telling people now, this is the 375th anniversary year. The Montaukets were here already, so the town was settled by the English in 1648.
Here's the funny thing, though. I think I know the first election on Long Island. Then, the first election on Long Island, as far as it being here, must have been one of the first elections as far as like our interaction between the two cultures goes, is electing Chief Wyandanch. Is the Indians electing Chief Wyandanch as their representative, because we forget that the peoples out here were mostly a matriarchal society, where the women were in charge, and then they elected Chief Wyandanch.
Well, I don't know if they elected, they had elections. You know what, I'm finding out, reading John Strong and Gaynell Stone, the two of our experts on the Montaukett Native American culture out here, the Indians had different people who were important. One man was important for hunting. Somebody else was important for farming.
Yeah.
Somebody else was important for speaking of the government part. So we did not know who the leader was, but what the English did when they came here is they made one person the chief in their opinion, so then they could deal with that one person. They didn't have to deal with the entire community.
That's interesting.
That's
So
a
it wasn't-
common thing that the English did.
So yeah, it
Wyandanch
wasn't.
was the leader, as we know, of the Montaukets, but was he elected, or was he just one of the men down there who were important, but the people in East Hampton only dealt with him
Yeah.
because they wanted to get the land?
Yeah. That's
Now,
interesting.
That's my take on people who know more than me have said.
But it's also, to your point, though, it's hard. I mean, it's hard for us to say because of the fact that the history that was written from the English point of view. It was not written from and this is one of the problems that we really lost as a community, is that we forget that every single time that we go and we take over an area, we are effectively losing those people's worlds. We're losing their worldview. We're losing how they looked at the land, how they looked at each other, and how they looked at, government is a reflection of the values of the people that are there. Who will govern you? And so you put forward people who are going to go, regardless of anything else,
Well, now that you were talking about elections, our elected leaders in this town from 1648 well into the 19th century, basically were responsible for the Montaukets being squeezed and pushed off their land because they used to sign these deeds. Well, the Montaukets had a different idea of land ownership than we did.
Yeah.
They thought of these as treaties,
Yeah.
not deeds or agreements, because every time there was an agreement, they were able to continue to stay on the land and hunt and fish. But our elected leaders, because they were English, said, no, 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 here's a deed. And we now have control of this land. And they did let the Montaukets eventually, go back through the years. But once Arthur Benson got down there and Austin Corbin, they just finished the job of taking the land away.
Yes.
It had already been started by our elected leaders
Yeah.
before that. Now,
Yeah.
that was the thinking at the time.
That was the thinking at the time, and it was a reflection of that community where it
Yep.
was these people, they don't view them at the same level that they do another person, really basically because of their background and their skin color, mostly, skin color. And I mean, we treated people of different backgrounds in general very poorly. Historically, as a species, we do that.
Well, that's why the witchcraft cases are important,
Yes.
because in order to hang those witches, burn them, cut off their fingers, throw them out of town, you had to dehumanize them.
Yeah.
You had to say they were different than us, so now we can do that. Guess what? This is 2023, and we still have some of that going on today. That's why those witchcraft stories are so important to remember. This is what happens when you dehumanize people.
Yes.
Bad things can happen.
Yes. And at the end of it, it will always end up with the destruction of your community's character.
Yeah.
It's every deal is a deal with the devil. Every single time that you make one of those deals, it will always come back to bite you. And again, that goes back to the idea of who do you want representing you? Who do you believe is a reflection of your values of a community? Who do you think is going to make the hard choices? We're talking about hard choices. Who's going to make the hard choices, the moral choices? Imagine if somebody said no back then. Imagine if the elected officials back then said,
Yeah.
we're not going to do that. We stand for something better than that. And that's what we hope for every single time that we go and we cast our ballots. We hope that we're going to elect somebody who's going to make a choice better than ours individually.
Yeah, no is a choice.
No is a choice.
No is a choice.
Yeah, no is 100% a choice.
Yeah, and you need your leaders to say that at times, but you also need to get involved and vote.
You do.
You need to vote. You need to listen. You don't have to go to all these meetings where the candidates are talking. You can go to
Yep.
LTV and you can listen to what the
You
candidates
can call
say.
in.
You can
You
call
can,
in.
you can call
There's
in.
no excuse really for not voting and for not getting involved. You can say, well, nobody listens to me, or my mom. No. You need to vote. You need to vote.
And I also think more and more we have to have more conversations have to happen in person with each other. We have to have longer conversations. We can't just go on Facebook and yell at each other.
I know.
We have to, if you want something to change in your community,
Isn't
it has to start with community.
I don't know. I'm not on Facebook, but
Neither am I.
sometimes the technology gets ahead of the ethics.
Yeah.
We have all that, but there are certain rules that should have been or could have been, but they're not, right? I mean, and
See-
you can be anonymous. That's the other terrible thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That people can say things on there about somebody, and you don't know who
And
did.
it's degrading to what the process is, because without that, we go back to the idea of accountability. All elections really have to be at their core about people being accountable.
Right. That's a good point.
They will always be that sense to it. And as we go on, we have to increase our accountability. And it's a very tough one. It's like when it's like, hey, if you call into the town board, you gotta say your name, you gotta say where you're from. There has to be some element of you're yada yada and you're from here. And you have to structure those points.
We solved a lot of problems.
We solved a lot of problems.
Jeez.
We solved a lot of problems.
Okay, you can go home now, everybody. We've got it.
Hey, we're here. All right, so let's see. Just check if I'm still feeding audio right now. It's legitimately just. What, the audio's back up? it's just Zach and I in the studio today, just feeding this out. We thought it'd be, smaller, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so going back to our election results. Let's see. Do we have anything? No. All right, and we're still waiting. Zach, you there?
Yes.
Cool. Do we have audio?
Yes.
All right, you want to come out?
Yeah, I'm gonna put on the bug.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, go for it. I'm gonna fix it.
Go for what? Oh, oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, that was nice. Okay, so yeah, scan that to review the results whenever they come in. The districts haven't reported yet, which is fine. And Zach will be out here shortly, and we're gonna find something to talk about before we rerun the older interviews.
Got it.
Hey, nicely done.
See, that looks nice.
It does look nice. Looks nice.
How we doing, Jason?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Zach, when were you born?
I was born in 2000.
In 2000?
Yeah, I'm pretty young. What about you?
I was born in 1986.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Was it like the TV didn't have tickers?
Really?
No. That was totally a 9/11 thing that happened. Like after 9/11, there was always a ticker on the screen constantly. Like it got to a point where it was just
Oh, like
very
the news ticker.
news ticker.
Oh, okay.
That didn't. CNBC, I think, was the only thing that actually had like a news ticker, and I think that was it. And that
So now
was.
it's like, because just in case, that's interesting.
I don't know. I think we kind of got addicted to just a constant influx of information. I think that's my own personal opinion of how that happened. I think we got used to every bit of real estate on a screen being used. And I think that's how, when we look at things now, there's a lot of that. Like even what we do here, I mean, I'm very happy about it in a lot of ways. Like because of that, like when we do like a town board meeting, you're able to see, boxes and boxes like that. That was the thing where you'd see like a little bit on like Sports Center, but not too much until, especially like, well, you had it in other shows, but it was like especially after 9/11 because the coverage during that was just nonstop. So TV had a different tone to it.
That's interesting. I never knew that. I was like 1 when that happened.
Yeah.
But so it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it's like, so kids that were born in the 80s, we kind of had this weird block where we're the last ones to grow up without the internet. Like, we're the last ones to have those moments of like, oh, okay, you go out, like no one has a cell phone, no one has anything. You just go out, and when it's dark, you come home. Like that was what we had.
So were you like, because you always see I always see in the movies and stuff like that, where it's like, like in the 80s and something like, so that was true. Like when you went out, you just come back at dark.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you can like be like doing whatever.
Oh, when we did.
But like with me, like I have my I like what's it called, my phone with a tracker in it, and like it's very like, oh, like you, like people know where I am like at all the times, which is not a good thing or bad thing, but like I've always been used to it. So it's like, oh, like you going to school, like I had like find my iPhone on my phone just in case something happened.
Yeah.
Mom could be like, okay, like whatever, or like now when I'm like older, like when I go out, like like, it's kind of just like, oh, I'm like, and it keeps track of where I went, so, personally, I don't mind it, but I know a lot of people like, be like, yeah, I don't want to be tracked at all times.
That's yeah. I think people have, there's pluses and minuses to literally everything. I think one of the things that happened is that I think everyone's worst nightmares with mass media and a 24-hour news cycle. The easiest way to keep somebody's attention is by showing them their deepest fear. And I don't know one person whose deepest fear is like not like losing their kid.
Yeah.
Like that's horrifying.
Yeah.
Like I remember because my brother and I have like a very large age difference. Like it's like 19-year age difference, and I played a very big part in like in raising him. And there was one time in particular where the whole family was like afraid that we didn't know exactly where he was in the school, and no one knew where he was. It's like an after-school thing, and that dread that hits you, it's horrifying. But when you look at that from the standpoint of a news cycle, I think people know that somebody's always going to be watching, because maybe there's some part of you that's like, I'll see how I could prevent it from happening to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the news cycle was a little bit different. It was a few things really shifted in the way that we consume media, and I really do mean the term consume media. When I was a kid, like the radio was always on, and for me especially, I always had the TV on, probably too much at times. Video games were kind of stupid, kind of simple. I couldn't go and like the only way I could play a video game with my friends is if my friends were there with me. So there's still like a personal interaction, You had to have that. But like God, like by the time you were 9 or 10, you have online gaming.
Yeah, I was like part of the generation between like your generation and like now the younger generation, like obviously. But so like there were definitely games where like we had to go over to each other's houses. And,
Sure.
Like, I have vivid memories of playing like an Atari, stuff like that. Like going to my friend's house and we plug it and we have to blow into the cartridge.
Oh yeah.
Like I definitely have a bunch of those memories. And a lot of people make fun of like kids that don't know what like a landline phone is, because like I don't know, but I feel like I was in between that like generation, just like to barely have the knowledge to be like, oh, like I remember that type of stuff, because like nowadays people like even born in like 2010 are like 13 years old, which for me that's crazy.
Yeah.
And they just don't know like a ton of stuff that's like that even like 5 years before 2010 like we're like a big breakthrough, and they're used to just like the technology being there, and like like I go over to my friend's house and like play Mario or something, and like now like every single game is like online now. It's like like we need I like the time where like you didn't need to like be in like separate houses. You don't need to be in separate houses, and like there's like a community when you come together with your friends and stuff like that, which is really cool.
That's a lot. I mean, people can have their problems with video games, totally, but like there is something to be said for like having people at least hanging out together, because you have that personal interaction with each other no matter what. There's still that group dynamic that's happening. There's still, two of your friends are playing a game, and then you're off talking with one of your friends about something else. Maybe you're off reading comics like I was.
Yeah, but what's really weird now, because with all these like new like next gen like PlayStation 5, Xbox One, there are like very few games you can play like double player like with 3 people or 4 people.
Really?
Yeah, like I don't know why. Maybe the game's just too powerful to support not support split screen. But like back like when I was even like 13, 14, 15, like on the Xbox 360 or something,
Mhm.
you could play 4 people. So you could like get 4 people in a sleepover
Yeah, the
or something.
GameCube was built for
Yeah.
4 people built into it.
Yeah, so then you could play like you know, go over to everyone's house and like play like a split screen, let's say like just like, you know, like any type of game. You can play split screen like I don't know if can you say game titles?
Yeah, you can say game
Yeah.
though.
Like Halo or like Call of Duty, like those are all like split screens. You know, those were my like bread and butter. But now like you have to it seems like you have to have for at least like 3 or 4 people. I don't know so much about split screen, but a lot of the reasons game you can't do split screen. So you
That's
have
interesting.
to you have like basically it's forcing you to like stay at your own house because you have your own console there. That way you can play with like 4 other people, you know, or else you would have
That's
to bring
really weird.
like another Xbox, another like monitor setup and stuff like that. So like that's changed like a lot with that, you know, because I used to like you know we used to play like 4 screen people and we'd be fine, but now we have to like be at separate houses because we don't want to bring all the TVs and Xboxes to one house.
Do you think that's changed a lot of how like your social skills were developed, or like how like do you think it's shifting how interactions are with people like when they form? Because like for me, you know, it's like the ages when you're like a teen, you know your teens is really where you learn how to operate in a group. Is where that's how you learn how to hang out.
Yeah.
You know.
I don't really know. Like, I can see it how it affects if it would to affect like you know younger people like not being able to
Yeah.
interact as socially. It's just like I can't really speak to that in that aspect
Sure.
just because like you know I was in the generation where we get to like go to the other show's houses
Sure.
and stuff like that, and I'm sure like you know there is an effect about like you know having to stay home and like to play video games with like people and you just talk on the headsets. But there's like no social interaction like oh like they order the pizza or whatever and like
Yeah.
everyone stops playing video games at once goes eats the pizza and then like
Yeah.
they like side quest onto like doing like you know something outside like in the middle of
Sure.
the night. So there is some like aspect of like that being a very sociable thing that I feel like you know it's important for like a young child to be like that and like not if they're mad at the friend they can't just like log out of the game and like not talk to them. Like if they're there at like the sleepover or whatever hanging out,
Yeah.
they have to like confront those feelings if they get mad at a friend, you know. And I feel like that builds a lot of like character in someone, and not just like logging off a game and like completely ignoring them.
Yeah, conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Conflict resolution, the ability to talk to another person and to have that. I think a lot of conflict resolution has been lost in the past, I don't know how many years. And I mean, this is just kind of anecdotal, but one of the things that you see is that in social media is that you can block somebody very easily. So it's like you can go and post something, which I kind of consider posting when somebody's offended by what somebody posts. I consider posting an act of attention seeking.
Mm.
I don't really think that that's usually the person's views. I think if I were to say what a person's views are, it has to be how do they act in normal society in a regular physical human interaction. We have to, I think, always keep the norm as the baseline. I think when people are on social media, because so much of it has been gamified, like that was a term that was out there for a long time. It's basically a video game. You're not really you on social media. You're a character. You're an avatar. You know what I mean? You're an idea that's running around in this weird type of like script text kind of environment. Oh, I like this. I don't like that. You know what I mean? And because the fact that the only way that you are going to get interaction or validation from those points is via the act of posting something that's inherently attention seeking, it has no choice but to make the comments hyperbolic. You know, it's like, oh, today's not the best day. It's the best day ever that's ever existed. Is it? Why? I went and I had a really good coffee, and then I went for a walk. It's the best day ever. It's like, no, no, it's a good day. It's a very good day, and you should be very happy about a good day. But it doesn't have to be the best day, you know? So again, like you can see it in the construction of the language. And the weird thing is language has no choice but to shift how your mind thinks. You know, if you're only thinking in really hyperbolic language, your actions are going to have to be either a black or a white, or a yes or a no, or you're either with me or you're against me. And you know, you have to be worried about. So it's just socialization.
Yeah.
It's how you interact with people, is how you socialize, and you can see this with almost any group dynamic. You know, what is the norm, and that's the part that we should be worried about, is the fact that people spend so much time online that their behaviors in regular society are being shifted by their extreme attention-seeking actions online.
No, yeah. I've definitely like been caught in that, you know, because like I used to like you said, like not fantasize my life, but like only
Sure.
post like the good parts and stuff like that. Um, and like since like I've learned it was like like a while ago, and like I kind of realized what I was doing. I was like, oh, like maybe I should like calm down a little bit with it, and like like I think everyone like my age has gone through it because I was like 13 when Instagram first came out.
Sure.
So like
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So like I was like I was like part of the generation who's like, oh, like Instagram's cool, and like
Sure.
you follow like all like the cool people in school and stuff like that, and they see if we follow you back, and definitely like it changed. It doesn't change how I acted, but
Yeah.
like when you're posting something, you want something to be interesting, and you want to create this like character for yourself, like you were saying, like an avatar, like online,
Yeah.
And I think just a lot of people today are kind of just like enthralled with that, just
Yeah.
like making the lives seem like very interesting. And I've never been like caught in the same exact trap. I'm not gonna say that I'm not.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that's just like a lot of things that like today it's kind of like it's like kind of a problem, but like kind of like because there's like two totally different things. But there's someone who like fantasizes the life or whatever, and like post all the good stuff. But then there's other people who like tweet whatever they're thinking at the moment,
Sure.
And then so you have two very polar opposites of like someone who like kind of like structures how they post and everything, and then there's someone who doesn't really care, and like because they're behind the screen, and they can post whatever they want, and then they can like make alternate accounts, and they can do whatever,
Yeah.
and then that will lead into like things like cyberbullying, which is such like
Sure.
a huge thing today.
Yeah.
So like there's two totally different sides of the spectrum
Yeah.
that the internet has like created. Like the part where like someone's like constructing their life and how they want people to see you, and then the other part is like people are hiding behind the internet and saying like literally whatever they want, and
Yeah.
like there's like have anonymity and just like being able to see like
Yeah. The price paid for a negative interaction. The price paid for being. Oh, by the way, everybody, there's literally nothing that's been reported yet. Just want to let you know, we're not just sitting here wasting your time for no reason. You can also scan the screen right over here. There we go.
yeah
But going back to that is there is no penalty to be paid for being hyperbolic or crappy online. For lack of a better term, from somebody. Oh, are you looking at us?
yes, I'm looking at this. Just want you gotta see the stream.
All right, cool. Or there's no price to be paid. For somebody being bad online, for somebody doing an interaction which is in bad faith. The good examples are, when Andrew Tate posts something that he knows is really more, what's the better word for it? Inflammatory. when somebody posts something inflammatory, they know what they're doing. They're using the algorithm to their advantage, which is they know that hate spreads. They know that anger spreads on a social media. And they know that if they're in the center of that storm and they don't mind it, they know that they can ride any wave. And that's a problem because we've incentivized that. And look at the guy. I mean, he's for what it's worth, he is capitalizing off of it. He's capitalizing off of a system somebody else made. And if you had to ask him, he would say, yes, I'm absolutely capitalizing off of it. There's a lot of other people who do the same exact thing. And I think one of our worries has to be, as a society, we should probably be a little bit more conscious about what we incentivize. I'll go back and I'll read do you ever hear the orator Cicero?
No.
Cicero was a great orator in Rome, and this is he existed during the time of Caesar, and then he was later on killed by Mark Antony. And he had a great, sometimes a bit of a lawyer. It wasn't as formal, but he effectively practiced law back in those days. And he had this oration called Ad Verum, which is at Verum, and Verum was this guy who's basically the Bernie Madoff of Sicily. He went and he ruined Sicily financially. He just embezzled them completely and destroyed them. And one of the things that happened is, if you remember, for Rome, one of the things of the Republic was how well you can structure your words. There was an incentive on the beauty of your language. And so Cicero wrote this beautiful opening argument that was going to tear the guy apart. But the guy fled. He actually got like a pirate. He basically got pirates to take him away from Rome, and he fled with all the cash. So the text still stands, but one of the lines in there was something to the kin of, if anyone could see what he had done, beasts, plants, mute stones would be moved to weeping. If you can see how badly what this man did to the people of Sicily. It was awesome. Now we just kind of have, quick 4-letter words that we want to type out on Twitter, and we have a blue check mark and we don't care about it.
Yeah.
The incentive is now towards gaming all of your interactions, So that's the weird part about this. That's the weird part about this. We have to probably, I think, watch out for a little bit more. Yeah.
So it's election night.
Yeah, it's election
Should we
night.
check if there's
Nothing.
None
None.
for any of the towns?
Nope. No districts have reported in yet.
That's crazy.
No. Still nothing.
Did the Jews take them this long? Or?
I remember it being quicker. I remember. I think the polls closed at 9.
So yeah, so it's been 30 minutes. Like, are we?
No. It's 10:30.
Yeah. Oh, I'm dumb. Sorry, my bad.
Kids and math.
Yeah, kids in math these days. You ever see those memes or whatever about like people in school being like teachers in school like saying, oh, like you have to learn how to do it on a paper because you won't always have a calculator in your pocket. And then now it's like, you're like, hey Siri, like what's like the square root of 5,695? So any ridiculous question like can be answered just by asking Siri. That's
I mean, it's a good thing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and you ever seen the thing with like the Neuralink?
That's
That's
interesting.
like that point is like it's really cool, but it's also really scary because um you can access any information in like in the entire like world, you know, at any time or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you have to think about like it comes to a point where like okay, you know, if majority of people have it, like what's the next step in the human race? You know,
Or
if everyone already knows everything.
or how do you compete with the person who has it in a job market?
Yeah, you know, so
Like for a while it was, oh, they have a degree. That person has a Neuralink.
yeah, I think that's when like I think it's crazy to think about, you know, because you know like everyone specializes in something, and it's like with Neuralink it would just be like oh like you know like I don't know how it works specifically, like you have to look like I'm like definitely don't know like the basics of how it
Sure.
works at all, but that would just having the like information just pop into your head when you think about it is like cool but very scary because then like if everyone already knows everything, like what's the next step in like society after that, you know?
No, it's a very weird one, and the other question is going to be, where are you going to look? Like the question's not what do you know, but the question's going to be what questions do you ask? You know, like right now with Google, you effectively have the same thing where you can go rather quickly and go and search for the information. But you also know that typing in the information into Google is not the answer.
Yeah, you have to look through like all like the tabs and see
But also on top of that, you also have to understand how a search engine works.
Yeah.
You know, like that's a little bit of a different point. Like I think Neuralink's going to be really cool for like injuries for a lot of people. I think there's going to be a lot of points when it comes to that. I don't know. See, the weird part is when it comes to interfacing into technology, right? So having your mind send and receive data for something along those lines, I'm very I'm hesitant of it. Mainly because I think that we're going to be able to do certain things in language, but language is not the inherent operating system of the human mind. So when you're thinking, I forget there's one linguist, I forget his name, he has this really cool point. It was you have memory, sensation, and a few other points. It was basically 4 different categories. And it's a mental stream. And you know how like right now for me, I'm trying to go and take all of these thoughts and this quanta of memory and experience and reference.
That was weird.
That was weird. Anyway, memory, reference, and experience, and refine it down to the right words. So consciousness happens before you get to words. And there's a lot of people who lose like language centers of the brain, but they're still conscious in other ways. And they'll be able to count or do other things and interact with the world. So you still have consciousness, but your language center isn't really there. Machines, we're getting to a point where machines, like all your artificial intelligence, is an LLM, a large language model. So it's good at language, but it doesn't have any of the precursors of what becomes language. So if I have a device that's in my head, a computational device, it might be really cool in a lot of ways. But I don't think it's going to solve the problems, the real problems of what it means to be human, what it means to ask deep questions, what it means to, for instance, people's anxieties.
No, you're right.
I mean, has technology increased or decreased our anxieties?
Definitely increased. Like I feel like so much anxiety is from like just social media and like what people think of you, like even if it's just like subconsciously,
Yeah. Now you have a way to. Before you didn't have a way to think. I wonder what people think of me.
Yeah. Or like,
That voice was actually pretty quiet, respectively.
yeah.
Now you do. Now you really have a constant little bug in your ear saying,
Do you hear that?
I do hear that. What the hell is that?
I'll go check.
No, it's all right. But it's just kind of funny, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll just keep an eye out. We'll keep an ear out.
Yeah, that's kind of scary, my guy.
You don't like that?
Huh?
You don't like that?
It sounded like someone was walking, right?
It did sound like someone was walking around here. Oh, that's really bizarre.
Did it say a ghost or something?
Okay.
Or if someone's here.
Nah,
I feel like we could hear the door open though.
we would.
What about the people upstairs?
They're gone.
They're gone?
People are gone.
Maybe it's just like the building settling.
This building has had some time to settle.
Well, then what do you think it is?
I don't know.
Maybe a ghost?
I don't know. People have been people get freaked out from this building sometimes.
I could see
So yeah, to the two people that are watching, sometimes people believe that LTV has ghosts, and I don't necessarily try to disagree with them.
that. Like, I don't know if you heard that on camera, but we just like, I heard someone like
Oh, I heard somebody walking.
walking.
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
like freaked out a little bit.
It's all right.
That's spooky. It's spooky, guys. All right, let's check on the election results. See if anything is.
Still nothing's posted.
Still nothing.
Oh wait! Oh!
Okay, we got some stuff.
All right, East Hampton. Okay, so let me go and try to throw this up on the screen for you. Let's see, audio, microphone, no. Conversation, no.
We have the election results. We're ready.
Yeah, give me a second.
10:30. Just gonna see if we can throw it up on his computer. Maybe I'll have to go back, but we'll see. So yeah, how's everyone doing? I hope everyone's doing well.
Okay, so that's just for a second. Give me a second. All right, East Hampton. Let's see this. Okay, so East Hampton. Let's go for town supervisor. Okay, so
But is it picking you up on that mic? Since
no, it's an overlay.
Oh.
It should. Do you want to go check?
yeah, I'll just
Here, yeah, and turn off the whatchamacallit, the table.
turn this up.
Yeah, turn it off.
Like, take
No.
it out.
I mean, go in there, and on the overlay, there's a table feature. Hey everybody, sorry about that delay a little earlier. We were looking at
Go through the election results. I'll just do
ready?
it.
3, 2. Hold up. So click on the asset, and then you can go to layers and then turn off that layer of the table. That's all right. We still love you. All right, give me a second. Nope. I don't know. What did it? You did that.
No, go back to the
Oh, go back to the thing? Oh yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, here. You go back.
There you go.
All right. So it looks like right now, Kathy Burke-Gonzalez has. Am I sending audio? Just make sure. Thank you. It's an overlay, right? We're still good. We're still good. We're still employed. All right. Okay. Great. So we have Kathy Burke-Gonzalez has 2,516 votes as of right now. Greta Leone has 894. And let's look at superintendent. Well, Steve Lynch was running unopposed, so no one should be surprised about that one. Okay, so town justice, currently we have David Filer, and he is at 67% with 2,336 votes. Brian J. Lester with 1,102 votes. And let's look at council members. All right, so David Lease has 37% with 2,486 votes. Tom Flight has 2,325 votes at 34%. Scott W. Smith is at 930 votes, 13%. And Michael G. Wooten is at 14% with 936 votes.
And 2 write-ins.
And 2 write-ins.
That's impressive.
That's impressive. I wonder who they were. Did you write in for me?
I've been here the entire time.
You've been here the entire time. All right, let's check out the trustees. All right, and who do we got? All right, John M. Aldridge, 2,356 votes, 90 at 9%. Okay, and then we have David J. Catalano, 2,487 votes. Tim Garneau, 2,327 votes. Francis J. Bach, 4,521 votes. James Grimes, 5,865 votes. Benjamin P. Dollinger, 4,416 votes. Bill Taylor, 4,414 votes. Patrice A. Dalton, 5,485 votes. Celia M. Josephson, 4,217 votes. Kurt Kappel, 2,057 votes. John L. Dunning, 1,809 votes. Mark G. Edwards, 2,297 votes. 32 write-ins.
32 write-ins.
32 write-ins.
Okay.
Okay. So that is the results from there. Again, everyone at home, please feel free to go check online yourself. I believe that that's about.
The Democrat Party kind of sweet.
A little bit, and yeah, and let's check out Southampton Town because there's a lot of contention there too. Okay, so Maria Moore is at 4,896 votes. Cynthia M. McNamara is at 3,467 votes. And let's look at the receiver. No, I think we skipped the receiver of taxes. My apologies, everyone. I'm going to bounce back to East Hampton for a second. I don't think we didn't have the receiver of taxes, did we? We said, okay. No, that was only, that was. We had assessors. Yeah, assessor was the one I missed. And there's the data for that. Okay, I'm going to go back to Southampton. All right, David Glazer at 3,814 votes. Teresa A. Kiernan at 4,435 votes for Town Justice. John Ortiz, 4,101 votes. Gary J. Weber, 4,083 votes.
That was close. That was a close one.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's actually that's a pretty interesting one. It's very rare that you see somebody get the backing of the conservative and the working families parties. Um, so that's an interesting one. All right, council members. Bill Pell, Democratic and Conservative, 4,865 votes, 30%. Michael A. I apologize if I'm butchering your name. Alassi, Democratic and Working Families, 4,270 votes. William H. Paresh, 3,175 votes. Richard W. Martell, 3,621 votes. And let's look at the trustees. Okay. Matthew L. Parsons, 4,268 votes. Rainbow Chavez. Oh, that's interesting. Rainbow Chavez did well. So Rainbow Chavez is interesting. Rainbow Chavez is, I believe, if I'm correct. I'm just going to copy this over here for a second. I believe Rainbow Chavez, Yep, member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. It's very interesting to have her view on the Southampton Town Board. That's going to be an interesting, Southampton Town Trustees. That's going to be a very, very interesting thing to see. And one of the bizarre things is to think of the fact that the Shinnecock Nation has rarely had representation in their local government.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. But it's kind of crazy when we think of the fact that this is something special.
yeah. No doubt.
like that's kind of insane.
Yeah.
That's a little insane. But oh yeah, that's so going back to, let's go throw back up the vMix controller. I'll throw it back up input 9. Okay. Daniel M. Van Arsdale, 3,821 votes. Margaret F. Freelander, 4,082 votes. Joseph R. McLaughlin, again, I apologize if I'm butchering the name, 4,117 votes. Mark P. Haslinger, 3,342 votes. Scott M. Horowitz, 3,956 votes. Chip Moran, 3,757 votes. Daniel G. Martell, 3,397 votes. Edward J. Warren Jr., 3,953 votes. So that's where we are right now. It seems that a lot of our districts have reported in for us. This seems to be not changing too much. Seems to me that Kathy Gonzalez is the town supervisor, and Greta Leon is not. And by these numbers, it seems that David Leese has been reelected as our town councilman, and Tom Flight has been elected for his first term. All right. Well, I think that basically ends our broadcast for tonight. Again, please go to the election results again, check them. These are not official election results. They are live from the Suffolk County Board of Elections. Just always give yourself that sense of due diligence, and just no reason not to. With that said,
Sounds good.
it's been a pleasure. All right.
Amazing.
Take care, everybody. You're gonna see empty chairs for like about 5 seconds. You know how to do this.